Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you're watching What If Kid Naruto was saved by Kratos and Athena. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
You will pay for this, Zeus. Be certain of that. Kratos, the deity of war and the ghost of Sparta, used his final breath to blaspheme the deity who had betrayed him in the midst of a torn city that was encircled by the corpses of both allies and enemies. All of his achievements, including defeating the Colossus of Rhodes, slaying Ares, and chaining the great Titan Atlas, now had no significance. His army were massacred, his body was shattered, and his authority was gone. All that was left was to recline and be encased in death's icy embrace. Zeus, Lord of Olympus, stood a few feet away as the hands of the underworld materialized and tightened their twisted fingers around the dying Spartan. He turned and started to leave, but he stopped abruptly. The god was alarmed that everything had not gone as planned, and a chill went down his spine. The disembodied arms pulled Kratos down farther and farther into Hades. Tartarus's barbaric fires raged far under his lifeless body. As he lowered himself, seemingly waiting for their newest victim, this black conflagration appeared to throb and sear even more intensely. A disconcerting chorus of the damned's cries reverberated off the scorched crags as they climbed up from the abyss. However, this was not the end. Every story starts with a decision, and even the Sisters of Fate, with their extensive knowledge bases, can't predict every conceivable result. Stone and mud started to tremble all around. From far above, a dazzling light exploded, tearing through the earthen ceiling and shining down on the worlds below. With purpose and speed, rays pierced the air like blue fire. The dead ghost's body, still being dragged toward its destination, was their goal. Kratos was penetrated by the beams, which surrounded him with their radiance. Immediately, any black hand in the vicinity turned to ash. Fearing the glare of the light, the other hands hurried back into their nooks. Kratos floated within the aura, poised between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The light piercing his flesh began to spread slowly until it blazed all over him. Every wound and bruise it came across started to mend as it went. The open wound in his stomach boiled and hissed, slowly closing itself in. A deep scar that ran the length of his stomach was all that was left of the horrific blow. The light finally raised Kratos back to the mortal plane and a new destiny, his wounds healed and his life restored. Gradually, the ghost of Sparta started to come to. He heard the sounds of a furious altercation as he regained consciousness. A strong voice yelled, "What are you doing?" The just resurrected warrior could feel the rage in the voice. The speaker said, "I am repaying a debt that has long been standing." The tone was matter of fact. Kratos roused his weary frame. He couldn't identify the sounds, but they sounded familiar, one male, one female. He opened his eyelids slowly till they slightly broke apart. "You foolish child. You do not understand. He will bring Olympus crashing down around us." Kratos's thoughts jolted to consciousness, and he resolved to do whatever it took to hurt the creature that had deceived him. But the gray-skinned man was still frail after his voyage into the land below and his prior combat. Even the smallest breath was a painful struggle since his chest was compressed and his limbs were made of lead. There was nothing the ghost of Sparta could do but lie there and fume in silence. "As would be right, father." The feminine voice spat out the last word with little hidden disgust. "Look around you. You fought the Titans because of their oppressive control, but look at what we've turned into. We are now gods of death, whose fury mortals must constantly fear, rather than gods of life, whom our people can turn to in times of hope. I can spare this man from the fate he has been handed, even though I might not be able to make up for all of Olympus' wrongdoings. Get out of the way, daughter. You will be held accountable for your hasty acts, and he must perish. I'm going to stop this heresy in its tracks." Zeus spoke, his voice shaking so violently that it shook the air itself. "I apologize to notify you that you are no longer concerned about this situation. Goodbye, Dad. I hope we can meet more amicably in the future." At that moment, Kratos noticed a dense fog enveloping him. Zeus let out a final cry of rage, but it was insufficient to prevent the woman from escaping with the resurrected Spartan. Kratos felt an unseen force carry his body away, and eventually the toll taken on his entire body caught up to the weary man, causing him to return to blissful unconsciousness. Kratos awoke and sat up quickly, pulling the twin blades from his back. His heart thumped as memories of what had just happened flooded his mind, and as his lungs heaved for air, He realized that he was no longer in his private chambers on Mount Olympus or in the burning ruins of Rhodes, but rather in the middle of a small clearing surrounded by what appeared to be solid stone trees. "Calm yourself, Kratos." The female voice he had heard earlier sounded from his right. Kratos quickly threw a sword in the direction of the sound, turned his head, and was briefly taken aback by the person he saw standing in front of him. She was a woman of medium height, her face a picture of royalty, her bright blue eyes looking at him subtly but with a hint of fear and regret just beneath the surface. She wore a bronze cuirass and shoulder guards with flowery patterns adorning their faces. She wore metal greaves and emerald-studded gauntlets to complete her armor. She wore the finest quality pure white linen over her head. Her tawny hair was pulled up in a small bun. A gold-banded headpiece framed the top and sides of her face, a trio of jewels in the middle of her forehead. "Athena." Kratos' disbelief quickly turned to anger as he let out a growl. Through clenched teeth, he ground out, "Where am I? How did I get here?" "You are in the petrified forest, near the eastern end of the Persian Empire," replied Athena. "And all will be explained shortly." "Don't play your games with me, Athena," Kratos said, pinning her to a tree while grabbing her by the throat. "Respond to my query." He threw her to the ground back in the clearing and saw Athena cough and massage her throat. "I was able to revive you and remove you from the city, but I got to the battle too late to prevent Zeus' last blow. I wanted to give you another chance." Kratos snorted. Athena grinned when she heard the statement, "The gods give no second chances." Kratos squinted at the Olympian and silently demanded that she go on, saying, "Then it is a good thing I am no longer a deity." "There is no way to restore someone's own life, Kratos. Life has to be born. I was forced to sacrifice my immortality and godhood in order to bring you back from the depths of Hades. I am as mortal as you now, Kratos." The ghost of Sparta grunted and yanked the blade he had stabbed into one of the nearby trees before turning to go without turning around. His desire for vengeance was already growing. "Where are you going, Kratos?" he was shouted after by Athena. "Zeus must pay for what he did to me." "Stop, Kratos." As if imperceptible chains had just clinging to his arms and legs, Kratos stopped abruptly. As he fought against his restraints, Kratos growled, his voice full of hate, "Do not get in my way, Athena, or you will suffer the same fate." Even without his help, the Spartan could sense the magic's strength gradually ebbing away, and beads of sweat started to appear on Athena's immaculate face. "Hear me out, Kratos. Zeus is too strong for you to defeat. You no longer have any power as a deity, and he is too powerful. Please have faith in me. And running away like a coward is what you want me to do, Athena?" Kratos stopped fighting whatever magic Athena had used to tie him at that point and turned to scowl at her again, saying, "No, I am asking you to let Olympus destroy itself. Explain yourself. You and our late brother Ares are well aware of what I am talking about. The people who worship a deity are the source of his power. A new god will emerge to replace the deity if they are totally abandoned, who will gradually disappear into oblivion." At these words, Kratos relaxed his muscles, and Athena released him. Kratos remembered his search for Pandora's box, and he realized that he had learned a new method of killing a god, the same method that Ares had been using when he destroyed Athens. When he was the god of war, the ghost of Sparta had heard his own men claim that he was more real than any other god they prayed to, that he was there on the battlefield with them, showcasing his power in front of them, and that his men soon claimed they didn't care whether they were in the god's favor as long as he led them in combat. "You've visited Olympus. The decay is visible to you. As the populace abandons the gods they once worshipped, Mount Olympus will soon be in ruins. Allowing Zeus to be his own downfall is the cruelest fate and the best form of retaliation." After Athena concluded, there was a tense silence in the clearing until Kratos gave in. With a sigh of relief, the former goddess grinned at her half-sibling and said, "Tell me your plan, Athena." "That is simple, my dear Spartan, we are heading to the east." The two fugitive gods arrived at the end of the forest after a day and a half of arduous journeying, where they were confronted by a vast chasm that was invisible from the bottom and the other side. "Now, Athena, what? Are you going to just jump off this ledge and let the fates handle the rest?" Kratos asked sarcastically. "I am unable to comprehend. According to all I read and studied, there was another planet east of ours. I'm not sure where I went wrong." Athena looked into the darkness beyond the cliff they were standing on, noticing something odd about it. She then extended her right arm, and when her fingers touched something, a ripple was evident through the shadowy emptiness. Olympians, turn back! The harsh, rasping voice that had just spoken to them caused Kratos and Athena to leap back and gaze around, but they couldn't find anything. Kratos screamed. "You coward! Show yourself! Ghost of Sparta, it would be foolish to enrage me." This time, a figure appeared with the voice, floating above the empty expanse. It had long, wild, white hair with two red horns sprouting from the top of its head. Its skin was a sickly pale purple. It wore a large billowing cloak that was opened slightly at the top, exposing its withered torso. Both of its eyes were entirely black, save for its golden irises. It held a long strand of beads in its left hand, and pointed teeth held a knife clenched between its gaping maw. "For it will be the last thing you will ever do." With fear, Athena muttered, "The Shinigami. Are you familiar with this object?" He had trusted Athena, but it appeared that she had been abandoning him once more, and Kratos felt his ire building once more. "Death's god. Although I had known he existed, I did not anticipate running into him so quickly. Why are two of Zeus' children at my border? Have you been dispatched to spy on me by that idiot?" "No, Lord Shinigami." Athena responded, "We choose to be here. I think we are the only ones on Olympus who truly understand your existence. So, what are you trying to accomplish? Why are you attempting to enter the East if you weren't here to spy on me?" "We came in search of safety. We hoped to find refuge outside of this planet after leaving Olympus." "What's happening, Athena? How could there be a god I've never heard of?" Kratos had been manipulated in the past and did not want to do so again. Therefore his rage was progressively getting worse. "Stupid kid." With a note of melancholy in his voice, the Shinigami stated, "As for your request, I can't allow it. So even the stories have forgotten my existence. Away from the conflicts of other gods and titans, my territories have lived in safety. I will not permit you to cross, since doing so could notify Olympus of their presence. Please, Lord Shinigami, we need your assistance. Zeus's thirst for power is growing daily, and soon the curtain won't be able to conceal you. If you can help us, I swear we will help you in any way we can." Athena was growing desperate since she would soon lose all of her magic and be unable to conceal Kratos and herself from Zeus's prying eyes, leaving them at his mercy. "What? Athena, I refuse to be coerced into serving another deity." Kratos had previously served several gods, and each time had cost him dearly, so his anger was now at an all-time high. The Shinigami looked at the two former gods, a debate going on in his mind, and although he had not anticipated that the eastern lands would remain hidden forever, he had hoped that they would only be found after Olympus had become much weaker, because a war at this time would be very costly for his people, and even though he was a god of death, he did not want to take more lives than he had to. Finally, as he looked at the Spartan in front of him, he had a thought that reminded him of something that had happened 6 years ago. "Ghost of Sparta, don't worry. I promise not to misuse any authority I have over you. Someday I'll need your help, but that's a long way off. Close your eyes for the moment, and you will awaken close to Konohagakure, one of my selected cities. I'll tell you what I want from you there." He reached a cold hand through the invisible veil and picked up the sleeping warriors, and the death god pulled them through with only a slight resistance from the barrier, their forms shimmering and fading along with his until blackness once again reigned supreme. Athena and Kratos fell into a deep sleep as the Shinigami spoke, and if all went according to plan, he too could right a long-standing wrong. Zeus Almighty, the king of the gods and the ruler of Olympus, sat on his throne and looked down at the earth. He knew that Kratos had survived his attack, but his own daughter had ruined his plan, so he searched every hiding place he knew of in hopes that Athena would eventually make a mistake and he would find them, kill Kratos, and punish his daughter for her stupidity. Yes, Zeus thought smilingly, they will soon be in his grip, and everything will be put right again. Olympus will remain upright, and everyone who would oppose it would be brought down. Zeus was so engrossed in his thoughts that he failed to see the minor tremor in the darkness on the planet's eastern edge, and he was so conceited that he could not imagine that his world was not as small as he believed it to be. Fear gripped the ghost of Sparta as the Shinigami's magic grabbed its hold on Kratos, and he knew what was coming and could do nothing to stop it. A barrage of pictures raced through his mind's eye, making him experience that terrible day again. He could recall every detail. The red veil covering his eyes as he slaughtered anyone he could find, the warm blood of his family streaming down his blades, the low, rasping sound of the priestess warning. The smell of smoke and flame as a village burned all around him, and the hard, smooth stone beneath his feet. The vomit that had churned in his throat was palpable. Stained hands trembled uncontrollably, and he remembered dropping to his knees, his mind unable to understand the absolute horror of the act he had just perpetrated, his heart feeling as though an invisible force were crushing it harder and harder. He recalled the agonizing sting of their ashes being indelibly smeared on his skin as he held his wife's prone body against his tattooed chest, tears streaming down his face onto his daughter's dead body. His anger was a cracked shield in the cage of his mind. His hatred of Ares for taking his family to that accursed temple was smothered, his anger at Athena for allowing such a thing to happen under her watch was drowned, and his disdain for the gods for their hollow promises of salvation fizzled and died. All of these defenses were useless here, because he knew the truth, he knew who was really responsible, and he was never allowed to forget. Kratos continued to be tortured, and the spell cast on the Spartan kept him from waking up and leaving the dreams that tormented him. Hours passed before the enchantment finally let go and he was able to leave the past that still haunted him. With a shock, Kratos awoke. His gray skin a chilly sheen of sweat, the sensations of his dreams still present, but he forced himself to suppress them, and his body calmed as the memories melted into his subconscious, and he gazed around, taking in his new environment. He seemed to be on a well-traveled, desolate road, and in the distance he could see the great gates to a city or fortress. The afternoon sun pounded the earth above him, and the forest of stone and rock had vanished, to be replaced by one life and greenery. The sound of voices behind him eventually drew Kratos away from his inspections, and the gray-skinned man turned to discover the Shinigami and Athena engaged in a lengthy conversation, the Shinigami speaking to him in his bone-chilling voice upon realizing Kratos was awake. "All right, you're awake. I have to start by saying I'm sorry, Spartan." Kratos was about to lash out and rip into the death god with his blades when the Shinigami said, "It is better that you learned this lesson now though." Kratos' rage surged at the thought of this being, who had been the source of his recent suffering. "I did not know of your condition before I forced you to sleep. This universe will provide you with a lot of new threats, and they might not always come as you anticipate. Using an opponent's worst memories against them is easy for a good number of people in my domain. Be careful with your thoughts, Spartan, or they might be used against you." The god turned back to Athena and said, "Go now. I've instructed you on what to do when you arrive at Konohagakur's gates. I hope we don't cross paths again soon." Athena turned to Kratos and smiled weakly, saying, "Very well then, I suggest we start walking. It seems we still have a good distance to go." The Shinigami suddenly vanished into thin air, as if he had never been there in the first place. Kratos glared at her, then turned and started toward the gates, the two of them walking in silence the whole way, one not wanting to speak, the other fearing that he would say something inappropriate, and by the time they reached the great stone walls enclosing the village, the bright sun had already started to set, and as they entered the city they saw a small booth with two curious people sleeping peacefully inside. As if on cue, the one with the bandage across his face cracked open a tired eye and started talking when Kratos and Athena arrived. The one on the right had long, dark, spiky hair, a small patch of hair on his chin, and a white bandage running across his face over his nose. The other had a navy blue bandana covering his head, a large swath of hair covering the left side of his face, and a matching sheet on his headband. Both of them wore dark green vests that appeared to serve as armor. "Welcome to Konoha. Please fill out the accompanying paperwork with your names and the reason you are here." He began to recite in a monotone, but as soon as he regained consciousness, the man froze, his self-preservation alarms going off as a huge, gray-skinned man looked down at him. He then gulped and went on, "The closest inns are the Green Dragon and the Prancing Pony. Do you need anything else from us?" "Indeed, we are nomadic mercenaries from the continent's west." Athena smiled politely and added, "We want to be shinobi of your village." The man continued to stare at Kratos and remarked, "You'll have to talk to the Hokage, then. He often meets from 10 a.m. to noon with those who want to join our ranks. In the meanwhile, you will need to find lodging and complete these forms. Tell the receptionist what you told us when you visit the big building in the middle of the village tomorrow. What else is there?" Kratos started to follow Athena, but she quickly turned and started walking toward the crowded marketplace he could see a few streets away. Athena shook her head and went in the direction of the building known as the Green Dragon. After they had departed, Kotetsu sighed with relief and dabbed at his perspiration, for if anything could persuade him not to doze off while on gate duty once more, it was the bloodlust he had felt emanating from the man he had just met, and the worst part was that it felt as though he had been suppressing it. His partner woke up beside him with a yawn. "So, what have I missed?" Kratos now approached the tumultuous Konoha West Market, where people were shoving and pushing each other as they tried to make their way through the busy village streets. The Spartan would normally detest such places, but the shoppers were wise enough to give him a wide berth, and he listened to the conversations around him because he needed information, and he needed it now. The Shinigami had been wise enough to give each of the fugitive gods a general understanding of the local history, language, and culture, but there were still too many unknowns, and in battle, ignorance breeds mistakes, and mistakes breed defeats. Therefore, marketplaces were a great source of information because one could always rely on some loose-lipped person running around doing their daily errands. He was passing through a group of food merchants when he noticed a blonde-haired child stealing an apple from a nearby fruit vendor. He was not particularly interested in the act because such a thing was not unusual in Sparta, but rather because everyone in the area could clearly see the crime being committed, but no one made an effort to stop the boy. Nevertheless, nothing he learned that day did more than solidify his general knowledge of this new world. After a moment of wary looking, the blonde child put the apple back and walked away with sagging shoulders, as if he had wanted to be caught. Kratos was walking past the child, still observing him, when the child's head raised and their eyes locked. The child tensed, as if shocked, and then he turned and fled, and the ghost of Sparta kept watching him until he finally vanished into the throng of people. Kratos grunted as he made his way to the Green Dragon, making sure to record the incident in his mind. Like many other nights in Konoha, this one was quiet, with both civilians and ninjas sleeping soundly in their beds, with the exception of the few unfortunate shinobi who had been selected for night patrol. The former god of war was looking down on the village from his perch atop the Green Dragon Inn, where he and Athena were temporarily staying. The warrior had left for the roof in the hopes of finding some sort of distraction, as he had nothing to do while cooped up in their tiny room and was unwilling to confront the horrors his mind so soon. He had no idea the goddess of wisdom had such a colorful vocabulary, but apparently filling out the plethora of forms the gatekeepers had given them earlier that day was enough to bring it out. Kratos would have helped, but they both knew that he was more likely to shred the forms in anger than to complete them, and even though they were temporarily allies, there was still animosity between the two. Thinking of Athena sleeping peacefully in her bed made his always foul mood slightly better. He had lost the only people he had ever loved in one of her temples, but she had done nothing to stop Ares' schemes. Kratos' reflections took a darker turn as his anger increased. Athena had managed to redeem herself somewhat in his eyes by saving him and leaving the other gods of Olympus for his sake, but that did little to undo what she had done in the past. She and the other gods had carried him along for 10 years, promising him freedom and salvation at the end of his service, only to cast him aside after he had completed their bloody work for them. He would play the game of Athena and the Shinigami for the time being, but only until he made the decision to stop it. It might turn out that neither of them had any ulterior motives, and that they genuinely wanted to assist him, but Kratos was not naive enough to believe that completely. If it did turn out that the two gods were playing him for a fool, well, it wouldn't be the first time he killed a god. Kratos was suddenly awakened from his thoughts by a cry in the night, which the Spartan promptly ignored because this was not his home and the different soldiers he had seen patrolling could handle whatever it was. Kratos was again awakened from his thoughts when the cry became louder and appeared to be coming toward him. Disturbed by the disruption, Kratos made the decision to find out what or who was causing the commotion, if only to divert the insomniac until morning. As he ran as fast as his short legs would allow, 6-year-old Naruto Uzumaki silently scolded himself for missing his orphanage's 10 p.m. curfew, his chest heaving in and out as he struggled to get the oxygen his muscles needed to escape the blank-faced men. He had gone to a nearby park and found a quiet bench to sleep on, knowing from experience that the doors wouldn't open again until morning. He had been sleeping soundly until a sharp pain at the base of his neck woke him up, and he reached back and pulled out a needle that was nearly as long as his entire hand and forearm and appeared to be covered in something wet. Then he felt groggy and blacked out. When he regained consciousness, Naruto observed a man with a spotless white mask binding the boy's hands together with rope. Naruto kicked his feet and struck the man in the groin. Then he leapt up and started to run away, using his teeth to untie the half done knot around his hands as best he could. It was difficult to corner the young blonde once he got to the village streets because he seemed to know every alley and back street like the back of his hand. The 3 other people who had been with the man, protecting him while he completed his task, were momentarily taken aback. This was all the time Naruto needed to leave the park. All 4 of them immediately pursued, unwilling to fail the mission their leader had given them. Naruto, who had no idea why he was being pursued and only knew that getting caught would not be good for him, screamed out as he fled, hoping for some sort of assistance. Because of his small size and the many hours he had spent wandering around Konoha, it was initially quite easy to avoid his pursuers, but it was in vain because he was already starting to get tired and the men were just too quick, nimble, and inexhaustible for Naruto to escape. Realizing this, he screamed and yelled even louder, hoping that someone, anyone, would hear him and save him. As he turned a corner, Naruto fell to the ground after colliding with a pair of muscular legs. Looking up, the little Uzumaki's eyes widened. When Kratos felt something plow into his leg, he jumped down to the streets below and went directly to the source of the noises. He had only been walking for a few minutes when he saw the blonde kid from the market earlier that day, and then 3 men with blank masks covering their faces appeared in front of him, and the boy scrambled behind him, cowering in his faint shadow. The ghost of Sparta glanced at the boy and then turned his attention to the trio in front of him. What's happening here? His muscles were already beginning to relax unconsciously as he asked the question. One man, who was clearly the leader, said in a tone devoid of emotion, "Move aside, foreigner. This matter does not concern you." "What if I don't?" Kratos answered, his body exploding with rage. "We will make you." The Spartan felt something pierce his lower back, and the leader's hand twitched. He turned and drew one of his blades, swinging it as his attacker. The 4th member of the squad leapt back, easily avoiding the blow, but he did not anticipate Kratos releasing the sword. The blade of Athena flew through the air until it buried itself in his stomach, and Kratos grabbed the chain that connected him to his weapon and pulled it to the side, causing blood and guts to fall to the ground as he curved it towards the front. The 3 there split apart before the blade could cleave them all in half, and they launched their own coordinated attack. One man ran to his left, attempting to cut through Kratos' upper thighs with his tanto, but the former god blocked with one of his swords, then turned and kicked the man in the sternum, sending him flying into a nearby building. Kratos threw both blades of Athena behind him, forcing the other 2 to drop their attacks on his bare back, and swiftly spun his swords in a circle to put some distance between him and the shinobi. The former god of war returned the blades to his hands and ready for the next attack. Flickering lights filled the streets, and people popped their heads out to see what was causing the noise, but it never came. Their mission had failed, and even if they were able to kill the foreigner and capture the child, there were too many witnesses now, and the Hokage would undoubtedly learn of it, so the leader had no choice but to order his squad to retreat and return defeated. He and the other unharmed subordinate grabbed their teammates and vanished into the darkness. The ghost of Sparta grunted, sheathed his swords, and gazed at the place where his opponents had once stood. He reached behind his back and grasped a small knife, which he tossed aside. Kratos picked up the boy and slung him over his shoulder, knowing that he would have more to discuss with the Hokage tomorrow morning than just joining the village. Athena woke up the following morning to a strange scene. Kratos stood across the room, almost protectively guarding the sleeping body of a small, blonde boy. The former goddess had little time to think about this odd scene because Kratos spoke to her angrily as soon as he noticed she had woken up. "Get ready and hurry up. We're going to see the Hokage." Athena nodded, still partially sleeping, her mind racing with concerns concerning the youngster. It took most of her attention to keep track of the youngster, who was a fervent bundle of energy rushing around her, chattering a mile a minute, and she could not believe that he was the same child who had been sleeping quietly earlier this morning. Athena, on the other hand, had to concede that it was a little cute, and that some of her questions had been answered. She had figured out that 4 people had attacked Naruto before Kratos had stepped in and saved him, but these answers only made her wonder why he had been attacked, why no one else had stepped in to help him, and why Kratos had helped him. The Spartan had become an even colder killer after the deaths of his wife and daughter, and his image as the defender did not fit well with that of a man who had slaughtered thousands of people in order to gain the ability to kill her brother. Kratos' desire for battle could not have been the only reason he entered the fight. Otherwise, why had he brought Naruto back to their room? When Athena realized they had reached the Hokage's tower, her thoughts ceased, and the trio was shortly met by a young secretary seated at the main desk. "Hello, guests. Is there anything I can do to help?" She said hello. Not wanting Kratos' short fuse to become a problem, Athena said swiftly, "We're here to see the Hokage." "I apologize, but the Hokage's public meetings don't begin until 10 o'clock. You're really welcome." Kana. It would be an understatement to say that the girl was astonished when Naruto hurried around the desk and leapt into her lap, giving her a huge hug. "What are you doing here, Naruto?" "The large, gray man allowed me to sleep in his bed after saving me from some evil men." As though it were the greatest thing ever, Naruto uttered those words. Kana swiftly trained her fetchers and, after glancing at Kratos, remarked, "I'll show you the way." The group soon arrived at a door that Kana tapped on, and Athena was captivated. Not only had Kratos saved the youngster, but if the secretary's willingness to break the rules because of his appearance and explanation was any indicator, Naruto appeared to be of at least some importance. When the four entered, it was a reenactment of downstairs, with Naruto going up to an elderly man behind a desk and giving him a big hug. "Come in," a gravelly voice said. As this was happening, Athena studied the man she assumed to be the Hokage. He was old, much older than most Greeks lived to be, and to be ruling at this age would be a huge achievement in the Aegean and undoubtedly a testament to this man's skill. Athena also observed that the Hokage looked down at Naruto affectionately as the two conversed, and she was once more roused from her thoughts when she heard Kana speak. Naruto's head whipped around before he virtually dragged the poor girl out of the office, celebrating all the way as he said, "Naruto, I have a coupon for Ichiraku's I was saving for the next time you visited." Ichiraku ramen. After the two had departed, the Hokage turned to face the erstwhile gods, his tender expression changing to one of a seasoned combatant. The Hokage's hardened face changed to a solemn one as he listened to Kratos' gruff response to the question, "Now, I wish to know who you are and how you met Naruto." After finishing, Kratos took a wooden pipe from the depths of his white robes, lit it, and took a deep puff. There were no markings or symbols anywhere on these men. The elderly leader nodded and took another drag. No, they all looked the same, including the blank masks they wore. "I appreciate you protecting Naruto and providing the information. We'll make sure to investigate this." Kratos' suppressed rage burst at that. "All you do is sit there and promise to investigate when a child is attacked in your village." Athena quickly moved to separate them before Kratos could do anything else after he roared and slammed a fist down on the Hokage's desk. She saw the poisonous look Kratos gave her before he stepped back and suppressed his anger. To her eye and his credit, the fire shadow did not seem at all shaken. "Mr. Kratos, I will personally kick you out of my office if you do it once again. I understand that you are upset, but this is a village issue." The Hokage scowled at the ghost of Sparta and said, "I will determine how to react to this attack." "Now, you claimed that you wanted to join our ranks when you came to this village?" He went on, "Then we might as well get that out of the way while you are here." After Athena nodded. "You can enter this settlement in one of two ways. The first is to let a member of our Yamanaka clan into your thoughts and verify that you have good intentions." As if still attempting to control his rage, Kratos shouted out, "My mind is my own, and I refuse to let anyone in it." The Hokage continued. "That makes sense. The majority of people who want to become shinobi do not go this route. After all, our thoughts are our last haven. If so, you will be put on probationary teams and have to finish 3C rank tasks and 5D rank missions in order to be allowed to join the village. Your teammates will be assessing your abilities as you complete these assignments, and they will provide me with their opinions. You will be accepted into our forces at the proper level if we determine that your talents are adequate. Are you in agreement with this?" On their behalf, Athena said, "Yes, Lord Hokage." You are then allowed to go after answering a few basic questions. Are you aware of what a chakra is? Chakra is the combination of the spiritual and physical energies that reside in the body, he murmured, observing the bewildered expressions of the once great deities. He demonstrated by flashing his chakra and creating a few simple clones, leaving Kratos and Athena in awe. Shinobi use it to fuel the many jutsu we use in warfare. Athena whispered, "Magic. Perhaps for some, but for ninja, it's just part of the routine." Without observing the brief glance the two exchange, the Hokage remarked, "I assume from your response that this is the first time you two have seen such a thing, and have never used chakra before. Then, most of the other questions are unnecessary. You will be assigned to Probation Team 3 under Squad Leader Genma Shiranui, Mr. Kratos. For your first mission, meet them at Training Ground 1 tomorrow at 12 o'clock. You and Ebisu Ito are on Probation Team 5, Mrs. Athena. In 3 days, you and your crew will gather in front of this structure. You will be given basic shinobi gear, but you will be responsible for paying for any unique equipment you want. Have any inquiries? All right, you're fired. Sarutobi sat in his office, thinking deeply. The two newcomers to Konoha had just left, and he had known that Danzo would try to get Naruto eventually, but he had not anticipated that it would happen so quickly. Usually, Danzo waited to kidnap children after their first year in the academy, but it appeared that the root leader had a strong desire for Naruto. This put the old Hokage in a difficult situation because he knew very little about this new root, which he was certain the bastard had formed after the old one had been disbanded. Furthermore, the village lacked the resources for him to send ninja on a wild goose chase, especially when the goose knew exactly what they were doing. However, he was certain that Danzo lacked the numbers and might to publicly oppose the Hokage, so they were stuck in a stalemate, each of them fighting for political control, gathering strength, and keeping a close eye on the other, waiting for the ideal moment to attack. Now that Danzo had taken the initiative, he needed to make sure Naruto was always safe, but who could he trust to do that? Danzo had root members at every level of shinobi, so he couldn't just put him in a guard. Those he could trust were too important to the village to be taken away for such a thing, and it would raise suspicions from the other nations. Adoption would be another option, but he was a master puppeteer, and everyone in Konoha had strings, so what could he do? It was time for some politics, and the old man's face suddenly lighted up with a smile that turned into a giggle and then into full-fledged laughing. The Hokage hurriedly dispatched his 3 counselors after regaining his composure. Night had fallen, and 2 guards were dutifully patrolling the dark woodland surrounding their camp. They know full well what implications would be if they were spotted slacking. A figure of shadows appeared silently from the darkness behind them, racing towards the bandits and swiftly cutting one man's throat with a large sword before throwing the lifeless body aside and stabbing the other guard through the stomach with another. The shadow then continued through the camp's perimeter, stopping briefly when it saw the main body, growling menacingly and preparing the twin swords in its hands. The specter charged forward, leaping into the air and spinning his blades by their chains to gain momentum, and the bandits lounging in front of him had no chance as he finished his jump and brought the weapons crashing down onto the ground, cleaving limbs, breaking bones, and searing flesh as the blades struck in the middle of the group, igniting a plume of flames as they did so. Remembering the pair of blades, he quickly dispatched any survivors as alarms started to ring in the distance. The rest of the brigands who lived in the clearing, all 4 in number, were waiting for him as he straightened up from his grisly work. A whole force of seasoned cutthroats was now facing off against a single man in the center of their base, and it was a massacre. As one, they descended upon Kratos. With a mighty roar, he met their charge, his lust for battle taking over. One quick swing of his blades was enough to take down the entire first row of bandits. Kratos then slammed an elbow into the sternum of a bandit attacking his side, pulverizing the man's ribs. He pulled back his blades and sent them out again in rapid succession before unleashing another plume of Prometheus into their midst. Seeing their opponent momentarily disarmed, the Rouges surged forward, hoping to take down the fool. A flick of his wrists returned the blades to their master, shredding through any enemy unlucky enough to be in their way. Kratos pivoted and released the mythical swords from his grasp, causing them to whirl around and cut down the assailants that had closed in. One man had the sense to duck and was able to survive long enough to slice Kratos across the stomach with his blade. Kratos returned the favor by grabbing him by the throat and then removing his intestines from their resting place. The ghost of Sparta tossed the disemboweled carcass to the side, sending it crashing into another group of charging bandits. It was through combat that the bond between swords and possessor grew, and Kratos was by far their favorite of all those who had wielded them before. The blades of Athena sensed their master's injury and started to pour the energy they had feasted on from the bandits into Kratos' wound. This was a small part of the symbiosis between them and their wielder, where the owner brought them battle and blood to gorge themselves upon, and in return, they healed the wounds brought about by such fights. After recovering from his wound, Kratos resumed his slaughter of his enemies, tearing through the bandits, taking one life after another with each move. Caught up in the fray, Kratos could hardly avoid the huge tree. trunk of a club that had been swung at his naked back. As the Spartan turned to confront this new enemy, he saw a guy even bigger than himself, with a broad chest and bulging muscles, wearing odd, scaled armor all over, a similar helmet over his head, and a demonic mask over his face. There was no chit-chat as the two charged at each other, and the man swung down, trying to crush the ghost of Sparta, but a quick roll was enough to get behind the brute. Kratos was startled when he saw the strange armor where his sword was stuck out, and he jumped back to avoid another club strike when a bandit managed to sneak in close enough to stab him in the thigh with a spear. This gave the other bandits the confidence to attack as well, including the big man who was in the lead. Kratos was unprepared for the attack, but not for long, as he was unprepared after being stabbed and suffering a few cuts and other wounds. He saw the leader in front of him, his club drawn back to smash Kratos into the ground once and for all, and instead of avoiding the attack, Kratos let out a terrible roar and met it head on, his blades blazing with his rage, cleaving cleanly through the massive piece of wood and continuing on to the giant himself, leaping onto the man and driving his blades deep into his opponent's clavicles. He felt it, a sharp tug in the back of his mind that he had assumed was lost forever, and he focused all of his will on it, allowing it to engulf him and release his hatred. Kratos' wrath reached its climax at this point, when all of his hate and anger had emerged and he was trying to escape in any way possible. Lightning raced down from the sky, piercing Kratos' body and streaming out around him, burning and blackening the bodies, but none could escape as Kratos cried out even louder, pouring more and more magic into the spell. In the center of it all was the bandit leader, whose body was slowly cooked from the inside out by the cold fire that raced through it. Soon, steam began to pour out from the man's orifices, and his muscular physique finally broke under the strain. In one furious moment, his carcass exploded outwards, and the bandit leader's liquefied insides erupted into the sky, covering the area in gore. In the midst of it all, Kratos stood quietly, letting go of the magic and staring at the bloody dye that covered the camp, laughing as he stood there with his blades bleached by the bandits' blood. He was a Spartan, born and raised for combat. War had been his home since he was 7 years old. Here, he was free from the anxieties of his mind and the concern for the youngster with the vivid blue eyes. It was kill or be killed. He was free here. One of his fellow Chunin muttered softly as Genma Shiranui stood at the edge of the camp, watching the newest member of his team. "Sir, I don't think we have to do any of the other missions." With a satisfied sigh, Athena wiped her forehead and straightened her work. This was her 4th probationary D-rank mission, and she had to admit she was enjoying them. She had done a lot of things during her time as a goddess that she was not proud of, so she saw this as a good way to begin atoning for her transgressions. A small beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. As she weeded, Athena glanced over to see her 2 teammates working on fixing the fence around the garden they were in. The old woman who had asked for the mission and her squad leader, Ebisu, were standing on the porch behind her. Athena went back to her work and grinned. Initially put off by the man's demeanor, she soon discovered that he was a very good teacher. Since the Hokage's presentation, Athena had been working hard to figure out the connection between magic and chakra, but as a broke foreigner, she had very little access to records, and her research became even more important once Kratos returned from his first expedition. Athena was torn by the news that Kratos had resurrected the fragment of Poseidon's wrath that was still inside him. She was relieved that Kratos had regained one of his abilities because too much had been taken from the man in his life, but she was also deeply troubled by the fact that these people thought such a spell was normal, so she had given herself appointed task even more of her attention. At this point, she went to Ebisu in a desperate attempt to learn more about chakra. Initially, she had only wanted to know where to find information on it. However, the man started teaching her the fundamentals of chakra and its theory. When she questioned why, he simply replied that such knowledge was common throughout the elemental nations and that if she was trying to learn about it, she might as well learn it right, and she did, at a frightening pace under his tutelage. Her previous role as the goddess of wisdom likely helped with this. Armed with her newfound knowledge and some advice from Kratos, she concluded that magic and chakra were, if not the same thing, then very similar. Excellent work, group. We will meet again tomorrow at the same time. Ebisu's dismissal aroused Athena from her thoughts. The old woman's thanks while they were leaving left a warm feeling in the former goddess' heart. She began walking towards the hotel Kratos and her were staying in for the time being, but then turned and began walking to the market district. Athena had something particular in mind to find, even if she might not be able to buy it right now on the have-pay probationary shinobi got. What a lovely lady. Athena looked down to see a familiar jumble of spiky blonde hair, but then she felt something slam into her and grasp onto her chest. What are you doing here, Naruto? We went on a field trip to the orphanage today. I saw you as we were heading back. Won't the authorities be searching for you? Naruto grinned and said, no, they let me do what I want, and I don't put bugs in their beds. Hey, where's Gray Guy at? She hardly suppressed a snicker at the moniker Naruto had given Kratos. When Naruto was informed, he started to sulk, but Athena could only laugh at the sight, especially because he attempted to do so while still holding on to her. He's off on one of the missions we need to do in order to join your village. Naruto, let me tell you something. Kratos isn't here, so how about we go together while I search for something unique? After a little sigh and a smile, she put her arms around him to keep him from falling, and they started walking. Naruto told her about his day, almost hitting her in the face a few times with his exaggerated gestures, and they soon arrived at their destination, a store selling shinobi equipment. He had wandered off while the pretty lady was chatting with the big man behind the counter, and this place was amazing. There were so many cool weapons crammed onto the shelves and walls, many of which were taller than Naruto himself. He only needed to get the old man to come here and beg to buy him one, because he was always a sucker for the puppy dog, and then he would have an awesome weapon for when he started the academy and kicked everyone else's butt. The academy instructors would notice how adorable he was and would have to let him graduate early, and he would become the youngest Hokage ever chosen in a world-famous ninja. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Indeed, Naruto had been on the verge of grabbing the handle of one of the numerous swords that lined the store, its blade longer than his height. As he turned around, he noticed a girl of his age with her hands firmly on her hips, dressed in pink khaki pants and a yellow t-shirt, her brown hair pulled up in two buns. Before responding, he stuck his tongue out and gave her a quick raspberry. What a dumb girl you are. What do you know about such fantastic ninja stuff? Hey, I've already arrived at the academy. I'm pretty sure I know a lot more than you do. Oh yeah, well I'm going to enter it next year, and I'll do way better than you ever could. That's correct. They wouldn't even allow someone as stupid as you to enter. You're the duty head. No, you. No, you. Yelling at the top of their lungs, the two charged and tackled each other to the ground, rolling around and punching and kicking as best they could at the age of 6 and 7, until two pairs of hands suddenly appeared and pulled them apart. Naruto looked up to see the pretty lady, who now had an ancient-looking spear on her back. Naruto, what are you doing? The blonde gestured accusingly at the girl. She initiated it. Athena grinned, I just wanted to hold that sword for a little while. After I instructed you to avoid touching anything? The girl began to giggle at Naruto, but the man behind the counter reprimanded her and gave her a mild handcuff on the back of her head. Naruto had the courtesy to flush and stare meekly at the ground. Tenten glanced down at the ground and kicked her feet as well. Tenten, I've told you how many times not to fight with other kids. Sorry, uncle. I'm sorry if my niece caused you any trouble. Looking back at Athena, the man remarked, she can be a bit of a handful at times. There is absolutely no issue. After saying, come along, Naruto, the two walked hand in hand out of the store and down the congested streets. Now that we've arrived at the location I requested, Naruto, is there somewhere you'd like to explore before I return you to the orphanage? As they walked, he pondered the question, trying to think of somewhere to go. A smile came to his face as he looked around before guiding Athena in a different direction. It would be ideal. Naruto put on his thinking face and looked up at the sky. The first place that came to mind was Ichiraku's, but he had only been there a few days prior with Kana. When Naruto told her that he wanted to go to the park, Athena had to admit that she was curious. His explanation had not helped, so now she was shocked by what she saw. A lot of wooden and metal devices with children playing on them, laughing while their parents watched or occasionally joined in the fun. In all her time as a goddess, she had never seen a place like this. Naruto led her quickly to one such device, which was two pairs of metal poles with a crossbeam, and chains hanging down between them with seats. He called it a swing, and climbed on one of them, and she stood there unsure of what to do before he instructed her to push him. Athena did so and started to smile at his cries of, higher, and, more quickly. She didn't give it much attention, even though the other parents appeared to go with their kids as soon as they arrived. When Naruto eventually jumped off the swing and carried her to the slide, the other parents left again, but this time Athena noticed that, although most of them glanced at her, she couldn't tell if it was because of her appearance or the strange clothing she was wearing. They all seemed to be doing everything in their power to avoid looking at Naruto, as if he didn't exist. She would make sure to inquire about this. They played together, laughing and smiling all the while, until the sun started to set and they had to leave. Athena took him back to the orphanage and went back to the hotel, where she quietly crawled into her bed and fell asleep, thinking as she did so that she now understood why Kratos had helped him. A faint knock on Hiruzen Sarutobi's door caused Kana to poke her head in as he was absorbed in his thoughts while smoking his pipe at his desk. Lord Hokage, advisors Kaharu and Homura, and Mr. Danzo are here. Kana, thank you. Please send them in. The door swung open, and his former teammates and rival entered. Hiruzen carefully examined each of them. Danzo was obviously a blank slate, not letting anything slip despite Sarutobi's conviction that he understood the situation. Homura was his old, apathetic self. And Kaharu appeared agitated, his heart going out to her, since it was difficult to prioritize one's work when one's granddaughter was seriously ill. His teammates sat across from him, while Danzo stood in a distant corner. The Hokage cleared his throat. 4 people made an attempt to kidnap Naruto Uzumaki a week ago. The abductors are still at large and have not been identified. No further efforts have been made, and no odd activity has been connected to them. Although I think the current crisis is over, the problem of more attempts still exists. Sarutobi pulled out 3 sealed envelopes and handed them each one, and they promptly opened them, memorized the contents, and then burned the papers on the spot. Are there any questions? I have called you here to review my plan to resolve this issue and hear your opinions. Who is watching over the boy right now? Homura inquired. He is now being guarded by Kakashi and Tenzo, who switch places every 8 hours. The elderly man turned to Danzo and said, I leave the task of choosing the boy's permanent guards to you, Danzo, for you know more about the individuals in our Anbu than anyone else. As you know, they are 2 of our top solo Anbu, and as such, relegating them to such a task for an extended period of time would drastically hurt our income and reputation. I have faith that you will select the most qualified individuals for this assignment. The dark-haired man's face briefly flashed with astonishment and then rage, but both were swiftly smothered. The identity of the person who gave the command is completely unknown. Kaharu stepped in. No, based on an eyewitness's account and my own and the T&I department leader's investigations, there were no distinguishing characteristics on their bodies or in any of their strategies. Additionally, there haven't been any notable intelligence leaks. According to the report, the youngster felt sleepy and fainted for a short while, which could indicate that he was given a sedative or some kind of poison. Has anyone looked at the boy's blood? From his corner, Danzo asked. Yes, but regrettably, it appears that the same factor that keeps the substance from acting on him also totally degrades it, so there are no remnants in his system. Though he doubted the War Hawk was stupid enough to use any local toxin, Sarutobi responded with a mental smirk. We will be unable to identify where it came from. He could see Danzo's game and wanted to know exactly why his attempt failed as well as whether it could be traced back to him in any way. Have you thought about how this might be an internal attack? Hiruzen cleared his throat once more as the question lingered in the air. Yes, which enhances the attraction of the 2 I've selected. Since they have only recently arrived in the village, they have no loyalty to anyone. Danzo scowled at this. Should we give these strangers our most valuable weapon so easily? Kaharu and Homura exchanged glances before nodding. As Kaharu responded, we agree with the Hokage. The fact remains that we have no information whatsoever about these 2, and they seem to have appeared out of thin air. No town would be stupid enough to send them in with no backstory at all, even if they were sleeper operatives. It violates every known espionage guideline. Additionally, due to their own anxiety about spies, they are more likely to be expelled or put to death right away if they appear in another village claiming to have intelligence on them or the Kyuubi Jinchuriki himself. Homura bobbed his head in agreement throughout the lecture. All well, then. The plan will be carried out exactly as intended since there are no more objections. When Kratos and Athena have completed their admission criteria, I will let them know our decision. They will then have to make a decision. You're fired. With both gods having completed their probation and their fates to be revealed tomorrow, Kratos stood alone on the roof of their hotel once more. However, a greater shadow than this one loomed, and he clenched his teeth, his hands balling into fists. Why now? Why him? His skin was paled by his crimes, his soul was stained red, and all he knew now was death because there was nothing left to live for. No child should have to endure such a fate. He was lacking, though, forever since he had arrived in this village, he had started to open up again, not because of the people or the missions, but because of that boy, whose scared eyes were so familiar to him. He had done something to him that made him want to assume this position once more. Kratos' thoughts ached sharply, and he collapsed to his knees, his hands tearing at his brain in agony. No, this couldn't be happening. It had been so long since the last episode. Kratos summoned all his might to stay on the surface as memories swelled up and carried him away in their tide, but he could feel himself sinking farther and deeper until at last his determination gave out and he was engulfed in the flood. Kratos was drowning in the sinful sea of his past as he thrashed about on the roof, his mouth open in a silent scream, his fingernails digging deep into the stone in a desperate attempt to find something to cling to, his blades carving into his back, tearing muscle and skin before being repaired by his own blood and then tearing open again. As if he had entered the eye of the storm, a calmness began to spread over his body, easing every part of him, and soon his entire being, flesh and spirit, was at peace. Kratos let out a slow, rattling breath, and although he could still feel the memories, they were now just at the periphery of his mind. Unable to believe that he had been saved, Kratos lay motionless. Slowly, his eyes opened just enough to reveal two doves on his chest. One fully grown, the other barely old enough to fly, both white except for a crimson-red stain on their breasts. Kratos reached up, being careful not to startle his saviors, and began to gently stroke them from head to tail. For the first time in years, Kratos continued to caress each dove, and he started to understand. Lysandra had raised doves like these at their home so long ago that he could still see her face when he brought her the first two for her birthday. She had been so happy, and he was the reason why. He remembered catching Calliope sneaking out of bed again to try and play with them while everyone else was fast asleep, and she had been so excited when the first egg hatched, doting endlessly over the newborn chick. Calliope, is this you, Lysandra? Is this how you express your forgiveness for me? The only reaction from the doves was to huddle closer to his hand. Kratos felt a wave of relief, as though a heavy burden had been removed from his shoulders. After all the years of labor, the blood and sweat he had shed to purify himself, he had finally gained the forgiveness he so desperately needed. However, he did not believe he would ever be able to answer the question of whether he could forgive himself. He was being ridiculous, Kratos said, shaking his head as his eyes grew steely. A Spartan's mind could not harbor doubt, he had never before worried about such things. If the dead could move on, so could he. He had always known in his heart that this would never go away, but now he had seen clearly, he had been given another chance to move past it. Athena, the Shinigami, and the Hokage had given it to him, and by the gods he would. A new chapter in his life was about to begin, and the most crucial phase was starting. The reincarnated god of war watched the doves fly up, soaring towards the night sky, and then turned and walked back into the hotel. The two doves gently landed on the pale purple hand that extended high over Konoha, and the Shinigami smiled toothily as the three slowly vanished into the night. Ghost of Sparta, rest in peace. I have high hopes for your family. The best month ever. Naruto sat in the Hokage Tower waiting room, literally bouncing in his seat, after being saved from the bad guys by Grey Guy, meeting the pretty lady and seeing Kana and the old man, playing with the pretty lady in the park, and now hearing from Kana at the orphanage that Gramps had a surprise for him. He couldn't wait. Kana led him to the old man's office after what seemed like an eternity, where he was joined by Grey Guy, pretty lady, and three other elderly folks. Gramps cut him off before he could say anything more. Naruto, I would like for you to meet your new parents. Sarutobi, damn him to hell. His hands were bound, and the power of a Jinchuriki was now beyond his reach. Danzo sat alone on his throne, brooding, his hands clasped together in his lap. Not only had Root failed to get the 9 tails, but Hiruzen had been able to place him with a family because of the foreigners, making it harder for him to try again. Worse than that, he was responsible for protecting him. If the boy went missing, it would be on his head. Depending on the situation, Sarutobi could even have him put to death for egregious incompetence. His eyes flashed a cruel mirth as he opened two newly created files his men had copied, two that would be perfect additions to his forces. He assumed it didn't matter in the end and that he would just have to keep doing what he had been before, gradually gaining strength both militarily and politically until he would finally take the title of Hokage away from that idiot and lead Konoha to its rightful place at the top of the shinobi world. Get up! Every muscle in Naruto's body cried out for a rest, but he knew that staying down would only make things worse. He slowly rolled onto his stomach and started to stand up, his gelatin legs swaying precariously as he assumed his fighting stance, and then he was gasping for air, folded over the knee in his stomach. You are allowing fatigue to divert your attention. In combat, never lose focus. Naruto was on the ground again, looking up at his father. Had it really been a year and a half since that day? He was still trying to process the fact that he had a family. Yes, his mom seemed to have a seventh sense whenever he was pulling a practical joke. They lived in a very small apartment until they could afford to rent a larger one, and his father had been running him into the ground for the past 6 months, but he was still happier than he had ever been. This time, getting to his feet was the last straw for Naruto, as his legs failed him and he collapsed back to the ground. His father eased his posture and threw a leather canteen to him. That's sufficient. In order for Athena to drive you to school, quickly recover and get dressed. Another strange thing about his family was that, although they never discussed it, he could tell his parents didn't get along. Mom was decent enough to Dad, but Dad seemed to despise her. He couldn't recall ever spending more than 5 minutes alone with his parents, and he had never seen parents behave in such a manner. Well, there was little he could do about it, and all that mattered was that they loved him. We will continue when you get back, even though his father was a huge jerk. A coating of late autumn frost blanketed the surrounding grass and leaves in the roadside ditches, the trees long since stripped of their spring growths, and Kratos walked stiffly behind the caravan his crew had been tasked with protecting for their next assignment. It had been routine so far, but he had a gut feeling that something was about to happen. He hated protecting these soft dignitaries, like his current clients, but apparently this one had heard of the two newcomers to Konoha and requested them personally. Athena was at the head where said charges were, because she was the most well-mannered of the group. With them were his squad leader Genma and another shinobi from Athena's squad that he did not personally know. After an hour or so, that sensation materialized when the ground rumbled beneath Kratos and two hands appeared from underneath him, trying to seize his legs. Kratos jumped into the air and managed to avoid the ambush, and from his position, he could see that the others were also fighting, each with a single attacker. By this point, his opponent had completely surfaced from the ground and was rapidly going through a series of hand signals. Kratos pulled the blades of Athena from his back just as his opponent completed his next jutsu. Earth Dragon Bomb, Earth style. Rather than confronting the attack head-on, Kratos twisted his wrist, embedded one sword into a nearby wagon, and used that as an anchor to pull himself out of danger. He then coiled his feet against the wooden cart and leapt away, causing the Rouge Shinobi to fail to cancel the technique in time, allowing Kratos to slam his shoulder full force into him. Kratos sailed through the air, finally collapsing to the ground when the back of his head struck a nearby tree's thick lower branches. The ghost of Sparta swiftly approached the surprisingly still conscious but dazed ninja and swiftly severed his head from his body, completing the task. The last member of the squad was nowhere to be seen, so Kratos left the corpse behind and ran to the front of the convoy, where the sounds of battle could still be heard, where he discovered Athena fending off another male ninja with ease while brandishing her naginata. Genma standing nearby, watching, but compelled to stand back and protect the client in case any other attackers were waiting in the tree line. Athena had the advantage of reach over the kunai the missing nin was using, but the size of her weapon encumbered her whenever her foe closed the distance. To his credit, the man appeared to be very skilled, avoiding many killing blows at the last second. His attention was once again drawn to the fight, with the former goddess largely in front of him, trying to stop her opponent from simply slipping past her to his target. Eventually, one of these strikes made contact and sealed the man's doom. A downward thrust from her spear sliced him deep across the chest, and he jumped backwards, flinching in agony. Her right side dipped only a little at the end of the blow, providing Kratos with all the opening he required. He raised his arm, concentrating his chakra. Lightning crackled around his hand, rapidly intensifying before launching the thunderbolt. The lethal missile flew through the air, passing just centimeters from Athena's head, nearly striking her instead, but it went on, colliding with the missing nin just above the heart, and he was dead before his feet touched the ground. Having completed the task, Kratos started to return to his position at the back, but Genma's appearance in front of him blocked his way. "Kratos, what the devil was that? You nearly killed Athena with that stunt," he shouted. With a snort, the demigod pushed past his squad leader. She would not be the first. The grass at their feet was gently waving in the gentle summer wind as two men stood opposite one another in a tree-lined clearing, their bodies relaxed but poised to move at any moment, and the seconds that passed felt like hours as they waited, neither of them eager to initiate contact. One man bounded forward, setting off the fight with a devastating spinning kick to his opponent's left side. Rather than avoiding the attack, the second man braced himself and caught the attacking leg in the middle of his armpit, using the momentum of the first man to his advantage, spinning and pulling on the leg with the intention of smashing the first man into the ground. The initiator saw this, planted his other foot on the second's chest, and used it as a springboard to shove off from and break free. The two parted, setting up in nearly identical starting positions. The sweat on his brow gleamed in the bright midday sun, and Kratos breathed heavily. He had been fighting for almost 3 hours straight, and his opponent was one of the best hand fighters he had ever encountered. He could feel the bruises on his body, and new ones were already starting to form on his side from the previous fight. Kratos lunged forward first, feigning an uppercut, but instead threw a straight punch at the man's chest, which was batted to the side, leaving his opponent open to a leg sweep. The elbow drop that followed was avoided, though, as the other man managed to turn his fall into a cartwheel. Unfazed, Kratos leapt to his feet and charged again, hoping to maintain the pressure, closing quickly enough to force the opponent to halt and defend himself from the impending assault. Thus began a fierce battle, in which Kratos's brutality and durability were pitted against his opponent's speed and dexterity, blow for blow. On and on it went. Haymaker, block, low kick, dodge, counter, punch to the liver, batted away, roundhouse punch, grabbed, pulled off balance, knee to the chin, spin, blow to the left kidney, backhand, feint, strike to the jaw. Then Kratos found it. A bone. Jarring crack sounded as Kratos delivered a pulverizing headbutt. His opponent's defense spread out for a moment, and he was barely off balance, but it was all the god of war needed. Gray hands leapt forward, straight through the guard's gap, and grabbed the man's head. He had finally done it, he had defeated that damn bastard, and silence reigned as the last echoes of the final attack gradually subsided. And really, young Spar, my friend, your youthful fires are undoubtedly blazing brilliantly today. If Kratos hadn't been still trying to regain his breath, he would have sighed. Indeed, Might Guy was immediately upright and in his good guy stance, seemingly oblivious to the drops of blood streaming down his cheeks. I should have known that wouldn't keep you down for long. Yes, I'm really well protected from such blows by my earliest haircut. This young victory, in my opinion, sets the score in my favor at 38 to 54. The only answer he got was a grunt of acknowledgement. He was noisy, annoying, wore that awful attire, and was always talking about youth. In other words, he was the complete antithesis of Kratos, and he could beat him in a taijutsu spar. So how in the name of Hades had he ever made friends with this crazy man? However it happened, and why, Might Guy had become his first real comrade in this strange, new world, and it was refreshing to be around someone who had seen some of the worst the world had to offer and still managed to smile constantly, someone who could divert him with their positive attitude, even if only briefly. Smoke gently rising from his pipe, the third Hokage listened to the most recent mission report while sitting placidly at his desk. Well, at least there were no serious injuries and the mission was successful. Tell me, both of you, what you think of our most recent hires. A tired expression was fixed on both of their features as Genma Shiranui and Ebisu Ito stood in front of him. Before he started, Genma inhaled deeply and exhaled in a long, leisurely sigh. To begin with, never again place them both on the same team. As you heard in my report, Kratos has little to no concern for Athena's welfare and virtually never listens to her. In contrast, she rarely addresses him directly, and when she does, it sounds like she's apologizing for something. She also detests spending a lot of time by herself with him, as if she's terrified he would kill her right then and then. Sarutobi's face lit up with worry. I had hoped that they might have resolved this after all this time. Do you have a better understanding of why they behave this way? Ebisu gave a headshake. No, Lord. Like everything else about their background, they are both highly secretive about it. The Hokage leaned back in his chair and let a stream of gray come out of his mouth. As near as I can tell, something bad happened between the two a long time ago, and they both, at least partially, blame Athena for it. We'll take note of this for future use. What are your suggestions now? To put it simply, Athena is an exceptionally skilled shinobi. She has a strong chance of winning a game of shogi against any Nara. Her Naginata skills are terrifying, and her genjutsu is excellent. She is also extremely skilled in taijutsu. I would absolutely advise her to pursue the Junin examinations if she had a little more experience. Hiruzen nodded in agreement. Kratos? Genma took a time to compose his thoughts. Kratos is efficient, swift, and vicious. He trusts his instincts, which are mostly always correct. He wields those swords as if they were a natural extension of himself. He is incredibly strong and resilient. He is a formidable opponent in a straight-up taijutsu match. However, his genjutsu is just acceptable. Oh, and I've never seen him manipulate lightning like that before. Have you managed to determine whether this could be a Kekai Genkai? No, they dislike talking about their lives before coming here, as Ebisu stated. Especially when it comes to the history of their families. However, he is a monster on the battlefield regardless of the cause. There was a snarl and a sigh in answer to the statement. I sense there is more you wish to say. Where do I start? Unless they show themselves to him in some way that only he knows, he doesn't give a damn about his teammates. He only tolerates their presence even after doing this. Even while on diplomatic missions, he lacks subtlety. When he gets angry, he may be very violent and rash. Collateral damage is a meaningless term to him. In an attempt to recapture the air lost in his tirade, Genma concluded, to top it all off, he has the shortest temper of anyone I have ever met. So, what do you think? The Junin hesitated once more, but for a longer period of time. Same as Athena, wait a little longer and then unleash him on the Junin exams. Oh my, a 10-year-old Naruto was furious and on the verge of tearing out his hair. Stupid Iruka with his stupid history assignment from a stupid long time ago. Naruto rolled onto his back and looked around his new room, which was mostly occupied by his desk, dresser, and bed. His family had moved out of their old apartment and into a new house about 7 months ago after Mom and Dad had saved up enough money. He got up from his desk and flopped down on his bed a few feet away, complaining the entire time. He asked his mother about it, but she seemed reluctant to answer any of his questions. It was a small, white house on the outskirts of Konoha, a short run from the western main gate. If he recalls correctly, his mother called it a split level. It had a kitchen, one bathroom, a basement for storage, and 2 bedrooms upstairs, one for him and one for his mother. If he recalls correctly, it had few decorations, and it had the bare necessities, and he liked it that way. How are you, Naruto? Athena called from the lower level. Yeah, I'm fine, just having some trouble with my homework. Do you need any assistance? Sure. Very well, I'll be up in a few minutes. When his mother entered, Naruto stood up and went to his desk, where Athena knelt down next to him to look over the problems. Naruto couldn't help but smile as he resumed his work under his mother's supervision. He wasn't sure why, but learning was always easier with her presence. There was just something about her that made him feel smarter, as if she broke down the barriers that prevented him from remembering the information. As far as he was concerned, she was the best mother anyone could ask for. She was intelligent, humorous, strong, attractive, and a terrific cook. Other kids were always talking about how cool or uncool their mothers were. Naruto, return here, all I want to do is play. No, you don't. You want to use sharp objects to harm me. I said just that. Naruto dodged the odd kunai that were thrown at him as he fled for his life around the academy's playground, but his fatal glance back revealed Tenten was catching up to him gradually, her eyes burning. His left foot hooked on the tree root that was slightly protruding from the ground in front of him, causing him to fall to the ground. Tenten was on top of him in an instant, with his knife poised and Naruto visibly perspiring. I apologize, I apologize, I apologize, I apologize, I apologize, I apologize. While Tenten remained motionless, enjoying the moment, Naruto persisted in apologizing until she finally lowered her kunai and placed a finger to her chin. With a breath of relief, Naruto said, okay, I'll forgive you. She released him and raised a hand. I was afraid you would kill me for that, hee. Tenten raised an eyebrow at him and said, you know I'm terrible at buncheons, but I wish I had graduated earlier so we could be on the same team. You believe that I was upset about it? When you informed me, I admit that I was irritated, but it wasn't unexpected. Naruto gaped at her and slowly lifted a finger to point at her, saying, I think I could count the number of kids who graduated early on one hand. So you're saying that I didn't realize you had your hair cropped and I was running for my life? The girl nodded like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Are you crazy, Tenten? You always had your hair up in buns. Now you're wearing it that way. How can I tell whether it has changed in appearance? Tenten reddened at this point and cast an embarrassed glance at the ground. Anyway, I'm not sure why it's so important to you. Besides, if it weren't for all the pink you wore, I'd swear you were a guy, Naruto remarked, adding that it's only hair. The air surrounding Naruto grew icy and there was silence. Oh, Naarrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr to take the last part of the genin exams. He had done well in Kawarmi and Henge, had nearly the best taijutsu in the class, and had learned enough to pass the written portion. Of course, since this was the Bunshin Jutsu, that was always a possibility. His teachers, Iruka and Mizuki, sat behind a desk waiting for him in the exam room. Iruka was his favorite. He was a little harsh at first, but he eventually softened, especially after realizing that nothing could stop Naruto from being a prankster, and he occasionally took him out for ramen. He snickered a little in his mind, remembering Iruka's face after the first time he treated him. His parents had been upset when he failed to return home immediately after the academy let out, and they were incensed when they learned that his sensei had taken their 7-year-old boy out to dinner. Man, his parents were overly protective. Of course, that whole situation led to another argument between them over his training, but he preferred to ignore that part. In his opinion, Mizuki was fine. He didn't treat Naruto badly or with excessive affection. Instead, he treated him the same as the other children. Naruto, pay attention. The blonde shook his head to clear his mind of any other distracting thoughts. All right, you should know the drill by now. Naruto rubbed the back of Iruka's neck and smiled shyly, recalling his 2 previous attempts to take the test in an attempt to graduate early. Naruto took a slow breath to center himself, and then he started to shape his chakra. Plumes of smoke surrounded him and revealed 4 clones, and Iruka stared at the replicas until a smile appeared on his face. They're not the best, but I think they're good enough for you to pass this part. Iruka, are you certain? Even though he has made significant progress, he still falls short of the requirement, and every one of them has a fairly obvious flaw that a skilled shinobi would quickly notice, Mizuki asked. You're correct, but his performance on the other tests was sufficient to offset those facts. We both know that his only problem is with chakra control, which he can improve with the help of his Junin sensei. Mizuki scowled a little before grinning. It's not worth a whole year back in the academy. Then congratulations, Naruto Uzumaki, on passing the genin exams. In front of him, parents or relatives were coming to pick up the other students in his class, offering them consolation or praise, while Naruto sat contentedly on the swing behind the academy, wearing a shiny new headband and a smile. His parents were both on missions, but he knew they would be proud of him, so he could just sit here and swing away the time until he made the decision to go home. Hey, that kid, isn't that? That's him, indeed. They reportedly let him pass. What? Every member of his team will be in risk from him. I understand. How can we be certain that he can control that? Shush, we're not supposed to talk about it. The murmurs and looks still hurt no matter how much time went by, but Naruto was accustomed to putting them out of his mind by now, and he shuddered a little when he saw someone leave the building. Mizuki. Sensei. Hello. Mizuki stepped over to meet the youngster after noticing him waving his arm while looking around. Hi, Naruto. No resentment over earlier. Mizuki took on an expression of contemplation before shaking his head, and Naruto cheekily replied, Nah, I know you just don't want your favorite blonde trouble. Make her to become a cushion on his first mission. He smirked and joked, no, that definitely wasn't the reason. Naruto laughed, but he stopped when he saw his old teacher exchange the smirk for a frown. What's wrong, sensei? At first, he didn't respond, as if a mental battle was going on. Exasperated, the man spat and punched the neighboring tree, saying, "No, it's just... Arg, god damn it. What is it? I am unable to inform you. The most annoying thing is that..." Naruto was more perplexed than ever as he trailed off, his hands squeezing into fists again. "But you deserve to know." The teacher's expression froze, then he swiftly crouched down and took Naruto by the shoulders. "Sensei, I don't understand." However, the teacher was now talking more to himself than to Naruto. "I can't tell you, but I can show you where the answer is." "Mizu." "Naruto," he cut rudely, "do you want to know why you were by yourself all the time?" Now as his thoughts was striving to catch up, Naruto was also frozen. "What? Are you curious as to why you are shunned and not acknowledged by the people in the village? Are you curious as to why the other children avoid you?" His heart was now thumping in his chest. He had been looking for that all of his life. After being adopted, those questions had faded to the back of his mind, only to come up occasionally. Now, at last, someone was willing to give him the answers he required. He swallowed, shivering all over as he made a barely audible "Yes." In a forest clearing, Naruto sat by himself, reading a big scroll that was slightly unfolded in front of him. Taking the scroll from the old man's office had been simple. He didn't even need to follow Mizuki's instructions because it was already out on his desk. He just had to get Kana to let him go up, tie the scroll to his back, and slip out. He tried to wait as Sensei had instructed once he arrived at the meeting spot, but he was unable to stop himself when the answer was so near. Thus far, however, he had failed to find it, since all he had discovered was jutsu that was well beyond his level of expertise. The blonde stopped searching and looked around when he heard rustling leaves, and Mizuki landed behind him, crouching with two enormous shuriken on his back. "I apologize for being late, Naruto. I was delayed on security duty." Naruto nodded and resumed his fervent search, but a few moments later, he was distracted by a whirling sound and instinctively jumped to the right, suppressing a scream as a familiar shuriken bit deeply into his left arm. His training was already taking effect, and he quickly scrambled to his feet, bringing his other arm up and applying pressure to the cut to help stop the bleeding and hopefully prevent any major blood loss. When he turned to face the front, he saw Mizuki slouched, the other shuriken on his back, and a crazy smile on his face. "Well, you survived, then. You always had the fox's luck, as I should have predicted." "Sensei, what are you doing?" His arm was still burning, but much of the pain was starting to subside. His sensei merely sighed in disappointment and ran a hand over his gray hair. He pointed to the scroll behind his former pupil and said, "That scroll you stole is actually the sacred scroll of sealing, or as I like to call it, my ticket out of this dump." Naruto was starting to get the picture. "You always were slow when it came to this sort of stuff, so I'll put it simply." He moved to stand between Mizuki and the scroll and uttered the words, "You're going rouge, and you used me to help you do it. Bulls.I, youngster. The only thing left to do is tie up the last loose end." With that, he grabbed a kunai from his pouch and lunged at Naruto, slashing at the boy's neck until he was close enough to turn him into a log at the alleged fatal blow. After the smoke cleared, the scroll and Naruto vanished, and Mizuki pursued him with a crazy gleam in his eye. Naruto ran through the forest as fast as he could, his left arm hanging almost uselessly at his side. That shuriken had sliced through large parts of his triceps and biceps, and while it wasn't a life-threatening injury in and of itself, it would undoubtedly hinder him more than he could afford. Damn it. He was being pursued through a deserted forest by someone who was faster, stronger, and had been doing this for longer than he had been in the academy. He had the sacred scroll of sealing, which he had stolen, on his back, and his kunai, shuriken, and even the sword his father had given him, all of which were back at his house. He tried to stop himself, but Mizuki's shin caught him in the face, sending his body flying through the air until he crashed into the side of a small shack. Dazed and coughing up blood, Naruto struggled to get to his feet. Mizuki simply strolled towards the boy with seemingly not a care in the world. He was only a few feet away when Naruto struck. Lowering his shoulder, he pushed off with all his strength and slammed into Mizuki's stomach, knocking the wind out of him and forcing him to drop the kunai. He then followed up with a hand strike to his jaw. The next attack was stopped when Mizuki struck his wounded arm, digging his fingers into the open flesh. Naruto reeled back and let out a gasp of pain, but Mizuki continued to press, sinking his fist into the blonde's gut and smashing him into the ground with an overhead jackhammer. Mizuki took a breath and stepped around the fallen boy to retrieve his kunai and finish the job. After his second step, Naruto lashed out with a kick, hitting Mizuki in the back of the knee, buckling it. The Chunin grabbed the offending appendage and threw him into the side of the shack once again. This time Naruto could not get up, no matter how much he willed his body to do so. Mizuki began to chuckle as he unstrapped the second shuriken from his back. "Well done, Naruto. You nearly provided me with a respectable warm-up," he remarked sarcastically. "I should have been dead after that first attack, but alas, that's just one more excuse to kill you and get out of this pitiful village. Of all people, you have the ability to instantly kill me if you so choose. What are you discussing? I recently graduated from the academy, and you're a Chunin. Go to hell," he shouted weakly, with blood dripping from his mouth. Naruto was furious. His own teacher had led him on, stabbed him in the back, and beaten him to a pulp, and now he had the audacity to claim that he should have died by now. Mizuki's reaction was to burst out laughing. He began to pace back and forth, still laughing occasionally as if this had all been a fun joke, and said, "And they don't even have the balls to admit what they did to you. Hell, you know what, I'm in such a good mood, I think I'll tell you before I kill you," he said. "Do you want to discover what actually transpired on the night the demon struck the village 12 years ago? He did the next best thing because, in reality, not even the fourth Hokage could slay a tailed beast. In a newborn, the soul kid born that day, he locked its soul away. Naruto, you." As the color faded from Naruto's cheeks, Mizuki said, "You were the one selected to imprison the Kyuubi. That's why I should have been torn to pieces by now, and that's why the villagers despise you. The nine-tailed fox is you." As the final answer was laid out, Naruto sat slouched against that dilapidated hut in the middle of the woods, watching the shuriken in Mizuki's hand begin to spin and hearing the whistle of the instrument that would kill him. He didn't care, though, because those things didn't matter to the pieces fitting together in his mind. The looks, the muttered conversations, everything. The pieces were coming together, each falling into place. He was a monster. With no hope left in his eyes, Naruto automatically prepared himself for Mizuki's ninja star throw as he pulled his arm back. He hacked and gargled as all life left him, until the only thing holding his body up was the blade sprouting from his chest. Then, all of a sudden, Mizuki's body went completely limp, and the shuriken was sent hurtling off into the side of a tree. The sword was slowly drawn out, making no sound as it did, and the lifeless carcass collapsed, giving Naruto his first glimpse of his savior. His right arm was tucked away in his robe, hanging near his stomach, as if in a sling. He had shaggy black hair and an X-shaped scar on his chin. His right eye was hidden from view by bandages. He was an elderly man, wrapped in a brown robe, the left side cut away to reveal a white undershirt, and the top of a cane was a hilt for the sword, held loosely in the man's left hand. "Traitorous scum. Why?" Naruto choked out, tears streaming down his cheeks. Why would anyone want to keep him safe when he had been on the verge of death and this man had saved him? In addition, he was a traitor to the village and deserved far more than death, the man replied. "I protect my investments, Mr. Uzumaki. However, I should praise your abilities. Given that you were facing a stronger opponent with years of experience and in-depth understanding of your fighting technique, you performed admirably. I appreciate it, but what did you spend in? You've never helped me in any way." The man's only exposed eye squinted. "Hell, I have no idea who you are. Dude, be mindful of your tone. Did you really believe one of the prohibited manuscripts would just be laying around, or have I done more for you than you realize? Was it fortunate that once you took it, no guard stopped you? The reason it was so simple to obtain the scroll was because my guys placed it there and allowed you to go." This man urged him to take it. Observing that he had sidestepped the initial query, Naruto remarked, "But wait, you still didn't tell me who you were and what you want with me." The old man's tone told it all for Naruto to hear. "What I want is for you to become strong, to utilize the potential that Sarutobi would squander." The words themselves weren't all that horrible. "You have no right to discuss the old man in such a manner," he yelled. "Dude, face the truth. The Kyuubi was locked inside of you 12 years ago. A legislation that prohibited anyone who could recall from informing you about it was later passed by Hiruzen. He fears you because of your potential for power. In an attempt to keep you alone and uninformed, He held you back rather than assisting and educating you. He tried everything he could to keep you under control. But my family. Only 6 years ago, and even then, it was only handed to you because of a need. Sarutobi may be afraid of you, but he is even more afraid of someone else possessing you. In order to aid any subsequent attempts at kidnapping, he only consented to have you adopted after someone made an attempt. From the beginning, I had begged to raise you, but I was consistently turned down. The same thing happened to everyone else who tried to adopt you. Sarutobi halted the process before it had even started. Naruto felt disoriented as his whole world was gradually being destroyed in a single night. Why are you stating this to me? Mister, even though Mizuki was garbage, he was correct about one thing. Remember this, boy. A tree is only as strong as its roots. The man's head tipped slightly to the right, and they could hear footsteps. You deserve to know the truth. The elderly man vanished in a whirl of leaves as the wind blew harder around him, and Naruto tried to yell but was unable to do so as he collapsed against the wall and lost consciousness again. Danzo was waiting by himself in the tree's shadows a distance from Naruto's comatose state when Yamanaka emerged from the shadows and knelt down in front of his master. Did you succeed? He asked his servant a question. Indeed, Lord Danzo. All of the recommendations were successfully ingrained in the boy's brain, but I'm not sure which will stick. Furthermore, the beast doesn't seem to have woken up yet. All right. You are dismissed. The Jinchuriki had previously escaped his hand, but this time it refused to. When he first arrived, Naruto noticed that his arm and back were still bandaged and very tender, even though the rest of his body wasn't too bad. He opened his eyes to see a white, tiled ceiling with bright fluorescent lights, white curtains all around him, rails on the bed, and yes, he was in a hospital. He heard a gentle humming and turned to find the source, seeing a silhouette of someone approaching his bed just beyond the curtains. The hangings barely opened when he was encircled in the person's arms, and a wave of terror passed through his body as the memories of what had happened came flooding back, but they were swiftly erased by the warmth of his mother's embrace. Athena ran her fingers through her son's hair as they parted ways, both of them smiling and misty-eyed. Naruto had no idea how long they had remained that way. It could have been forever, and all he knew was that he wished it could last that long. She finally remarked, "You had us so worried. I apologize, Mom." His mother shook her head a little, and he trailed off, uncertain of what to say. You don't need to give an explanation just now. The fact that you are safe is all that matters." The blonde with the whiskers nodded and then surveyed the room. "Where is Dad?" Athena sighed as he asked. "After standing by your bed for 14 hours, Guy eventually persuaded him to go get some food. When he first burst in after learning what had happened to you, he nearly gave one of the nurses a heart attack." He laughed. "Yeah, that sounded like his father." Athena kissed his forehead, and they remained close. He had been trying to put this off until later, but Naruto gulped when Kratos burst through the doors a few minutes later and discovered his son awake and quite well off in his bed. In a second, Dad was at his side, and he was seeing stars from the back of his head to the bottom. "Boy, what on earth were you thinking?" With veins bulging in his neck, Kratos roared. "What could have made you do something so stupid? Breaking into the Hokage Tower, stealing classified information, consorting with a traitor, and getting into a fight without any of your equipment with you." Naruto began. "I just wanted answers." Replies. "Answers so crucial that you couldn't wait for me or Athena to come back and ask us? Were you in such dire need of them that you would aid someone in betraying your city?" His dad cut him off. "But Dad, no, but Dads." Naruto was filled with humiliation by his father's remarks and could only stare down at his hands. He looked swiftly to his mother for help, but she shook her head slowly. "There is no excuse for this idiocy. Naruto, you should have come to us first." She whispered quietly, Kratos still yelling at him. "What you did was extremely foolish and dangerous." "I would have, but I had to know immediately and you two were gone. I had to, even though I knew it was foolish." "Just tell us what it was, Naruto." No, it couldn't be true. Even if it were, he couldn't ask. His reality had already been ruined by questions, so he couldn't let that happen again. Nevertheless, he had to know, he had to ask. Naruto opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. How could he start telling his parents, anybody, this? His brain fumbled with words, trying to come up with something, when a thought came to him. "Were you aware?" Kratos halted in the middle of his diatribe, and his mother asked. Naruto whispered. "What are you saying? Were you aware? Did you know that I have a demon inside of me?" he said, his voice becoming louder. "I'm a monster, did you know that?" Athena tried to pull him in for another hug, but he shoved her away. Eventually, she responded. By the end, he was shrieking, his whole body trembling, his hands clenched in rage. His parents were silent for a long. "Yes, we did. What kept you from telling me?" Naruto started crying because he realized that everyone he knew had deceived him. "Athena and I had intended to inform him following your first significant mission as a genin, but Kratos informed him because you weren't ready, and from what I've seen, you still aren't. We thought you would be capable of handling such news by then. I understand that you feel deceived, Naruto, but it was the best course of action. When you were informed about the Kyuubi, the Hokage notified us the day after we adopted you and let us make the decision. We were only attempting to shield you from the reality. We never intended to cause you any harm." Athena said. "We still love you." Naruto sniffed. At this, Kratos couldn't help but laugh a little. "But I'm a demon." With a sense of relief, the boy nodded and said, "Brat, I've fought many monsters and demons, trust me. You are far from being one." His parents had loved him for 6 years despite knowing what was inside of him, and he silently vowed in his mind to get stronger so that they wouldn't have to worry about him ever again and that he could finally protect them. Indeed, his family was far from perfect, but in that hospital room, surrounded by the warmth of his mother and father, Naruto realized something important. He nodded to himself, jumped up in his bed, and embraced his father around the neck. Kratos did not move to return the affection, but to anyone who knew him well, his face said that needed to be. Athena smiled softly, got up, and walked around to their side, placing a hand on her son's shoulder and giving him a gentle rub. Perfect was dull. The following morning, Naruto was alone in his hospital room, rushing to get dressed. His parents had been called in for a Junin meeting earlier in the morning, and his nurse had just informed him that he was free to leave, so he wanted to get to the academy as soon as possible. Today was team assignments, and he would finally be able to go on missions, which would be absolutely fantastic. Naruto took off his hospital gown and put on the outfit his mother had bought him the last time she took him shopping. It was very similar to the old jumpsuit he wore, but it had more black on the back and sleeves of the jacket, and a black strip ran down each orange pant leg as well. He wore a blood-red shirt underneath, and the sword his father had given him for his 12th birthday hung off his black belt on his left side. It was a short sword, only about 18 inches long, that Dad called a xiphos. The blade had a vaguely leafed shape, tapering in slightly before bulging out to its widest point about 2/3 of the way down, then tapering again into a point. His father had to pay Tenten's uncle a lot of money to forge the entire thing from scratch, apparently because the design was exclusive to the area where his parents had once lived. Naruto finished the outfit by strapping his kunai holster to his right leg. When he was ready, Naruto made the decision to quickly scan the room to make sure he hadn't forgotten anything significant. While searching, he noticed something protruding from the nightstand next to his bed, so he opened the drawer to see what it was. A small scroll with a note attached was found inside, and he picked up the brief letter first before starting to read. "Greetings. Mr. Uzumaki Sarutobi has many eyes and ears in the village, and I regret that our chat in the forest ended so abruptly, but I do not think it is wise for others to know of our letters just yet. As a sign of good faith, I offer you this scroll. My contacts have informed me that you have trouble with conventional Bushin Jutsu, so I think this should assist. I understand if you are still doubting me and my intentions." Naruto folded the note and tucked it into his pocket. He still hadn't told anyone what had actually happened in the forest that night, and he wasn't sure why. Perhaps he was angry that no one had told him about the Kyuubi, or perhaps he didn't understand why, but whenever he considered doing so, it was like a voice in the back of his mind kept telling him it was a bad idea, and the more he considered it, the louder and more insistent the voice became. Setting those things aside for the time being, he pulled out the scroll and sat down on the bed. Kage Bushin, huh? Naruto sat quietly at his desk in the academy, where most of the other kids were up and about, chatting to each other, since Iruka-sensei hadn't arrived yet. He relaxed quietly, not bothering to join in, mainly because he didn't have any close friends. Yes, there were kids he knew and would occasionally talk to, but his training had taken up a lot of his free time while in the academy, making it difficult to make any lasting friendships. and the other kids seemed tired of him, if not them, then their parents. First and foremost was Sasuke Uchiha. Man, he hated that guy. He always acted so cool and collected. Naruto could count on one hand how many times he had seen Sasuke show emotion. For some reason, this made every girl in the class love him, even though he never acknowledged them. But worst of all, he was good. As much as Naruto hated to admit it, he had to admit that Sasuke was the best in every category except one, making it look easy. Naturally, this did not stop Naruto's attempts to overthrow him. Since their first taijutsu match, a sort of rivalry had developed between them, with Sasuke trying to maintain his top dog position while Naruto was always one step behind him. Sakura Haruno was the second. They had gotten along well their first year, but eventually things forced them to drift apart, and training and studying took precedence over playing together and talking. Eventually, they stopped interacting altogether, but he was happy to see that her hard work paid off. She was definitely the best in the class when it came to concepts and theory, and he hoped that once they were assigned teams, he could resume his social life with her. Iruka's shouting caught Naruto off guard, and he nearly fell out of his chair. After everyone had hurried back to their seats, the scarred teacher started his congratulatory speech, which he was fortunate to have practiced long enough to know how to keep it brief and sweet. Naruto paid close attention the entire time, because even his mother could be frightening when it came to slacking off at school. Next came the announcement of teams, and Naruto's ears perked at the sound of his name. Naruto Uzumaki, Sakura Haruno, and Sasuke Uchiha, you will be Team 7. Talk about coincidences. After sending Sakura a wave and a grin, which were returned, Naruto spent the remainder of the time in a furious glaring match with Sasuke before Iruka. Sensei dismissed them for lunch. For the most part, lunch went rather smoothly. Sasuke had gone to wherever he usually eats by himself, so Sakura and he got together and spent the time catching up. It had been pleasant, and he had forgotten how kind she was. He was still wondering why he had a weird feeling in his stomach when Sakura unintentionally touched his arm with her hand as she got up to go back to class. In any case, Naruto finally thought that it was probably just the milk he had consumed this morning. The Junin started to gather their students after all the kids had returned and sat down, and then it happened. Kratos, with his gray-skinned body radiating power and authority, marched in and stood imposingly in the front of the room, arms folded across his chest. Naruto was filled with pure joy and leapt up onto his seat. Yeah, the old man would come for me. I'm getting the best teacher ever, so you guys can go screw off. This will be fantastic. After his scream was over, Kratos spoke in a demanding tone, and Naruto looked at his father, who was wearing the grin that he only wore during training when something terrible for Naruto and funny for him was about to happen. Naruto felt his blood run cold. Team 10, follow. He turned and walked away, the newest Ino, Shika, Cho trio following closely behind him so as not to upset the imposing man. Naruto fell into his chair, his face turning red with embarrassment, and he started to sink lower and lower beneath the wooden desk until his mother entered. At first, he was cautious, not wanting a repeat of what had happened with his father, but that changed when she stopped and smiled up at him. Hope rushed forward in Naruto's mind. What had he been thinking? Why would he want him as a teacher? It was awful. Of course Mom would be the one to take over now. It made perfect sense. This time, Naruto kept his victory dance inside his head, thinking that one outburst was enough for today. I apologize, son. Please, may Team 8 accompany me? After Athena's first words, Naruto's body and mind froze, and then his head fell forward, slamming the top of the desk in defeat. If neither Mom nor Dad were going to be his sensei, then who was he, she? And where the hell was he, she? Kratos surveyed the three new genin before him, assessing them. Training ground number 31, a desolate area with scarcely a tree in sight, was encircled by rocky hills, sparsely covered with the few kinds of grass that could withstand the harsh terrain, with only one small growth of knotty pines able to establish itself atop one of the bluffs close to the center, and the ground still slightly damp from a spring shower the night before. Kratos frowned as he observed his students. He had worked with numerous members of these three clans during his time here, but despite his knowledge of their potential, he was unimpressed by what he saw and read in their files. The Akamichi was stuffing his face, the Nara, of course, had fallen asleep on the ground as soon as they arrived, and the Yamanaka, apparently, was still looking for a dry place to sit. It was fortunate that Sarutobi Kratos held him in such high regard, because he would never have consented to this. Kratos abruptly exclaimed, "Listen up, urchins." The three of them instantly halted their activities and turned to face him, fearful, terrified. "We will meet here at the crack of dawn to see if teaching you will be a waste of my time," Kratos stated. "I'll be a student for whoever passes. Failure will result in expulsion from the program." He turned to go after saying, "Don't be late." The boy's own could wait till evening, and the brat would be home in a few hours, giving him time to train himself. "What? You can't simply say that and walk away," the blonde would have continued after taking a breath, but Kratos interrupted her with a sneer. "Aren't you even going to introduce yourself or something?" she said, stopping him in his tracks. "No," his body briefly appeared before their sight before vanishing. Kiba was the first to recover from his surprise and pointed an accusing finger at his new teacher as Shino, Hinata, and Kiba stood in a line in another training ground, all four of them staring at Athena, in the middle of an open field of green grass, with not a single bump to mar the flatness. "Are you saying that we must take another test at this time? We have previously passed the academy exam." Athena grinned at the youngster. "I don't even have all my gear with me." "To answer your first question, I will not take on anyone as a student," he said, coloring at the small scolding. "A shinobi must be prepared to fight at any time, Kiba. I am the best teacher. There are no exceptions. This is your test," Athena said, pulling her naginata from its holster faster than the three kids could see, spinning it around, and driving the blade deep into the ground so the pole pointed directly up toward the sky. "Within an hour, anyone who manages to get by me and touch my naginata is eliminated. You are free to employ whatever weapon or tactic you possess. In order to have any chance of doing so, they will be required." "Well, sensei, shouldn't you use your weapon as well if we're all going to be fighting?" The next moment showed the Inuzuka with his back on the grass, legs swept from underneath him, and Athena's sandaled foot pressing down on his chest. Kiba queried, his face displaying bewilderment. "The test starts now." The former goddess stepped off of Kiba and assisted him in standing up, saying, "Lesson 1. Never question an opponent willing to handicap him, herself in a fight." Astonishingly, Shino took the initiative, running to the right to try to avoid her, and he was still 10 feet away when Athena came and backhanded him. Kiba then made a frantic run directly at the goal, and Athena rolled backwards and grabbed one of the boy's ankles, sending him down again. She then spun around and threw him into Shino, who had just recovered from her first blow, and the boys lay on the grass for a while before Shino spoke. "I think we should try using a different approach now." Kiba nodded in agreement, scurried to his feet, and ran directly at the Junin. As he was almost upon her, he said, "Akamaru." A white dog jumped out of his jacket and snapped at the Junin's face as his master attempted to tackle her. Athena put her hands on the ground and turned, slamming one leg into Akamaru's side and then into his owner's. When she got back up, she was encircled by a swarm of tiny insects, who then retreated to reveal a terrified Hinata in her teacher's place. Athena stood grinning at them where Hinata had been before. With his Kakaichu now milling around him, Shino apologized, "Forgive me, Hinata, I did not know Sensei had replaced herself with you until it was too late." Still a little scared, she said, It's okay, Shino." Kiba was up by this point and saw something odd. "Hold on a minute," he yelled, "look where you are, Hinata." She turned to see that she was only a few feet away from the naginata, and they all turned to Athena, who merely grinned. "What the hell? Why doesn't she knock you around the way we do?" Don Tino Kiba. A thought started to take shape in Shino's head, so he decided to give it a try and started running in the direction of the weapon. He hadn't even made it to Hinata when Athena replaced herself with the girl again and batted him away. Kiba ran forward again, meeting the same end as Shino, and he got up on one knee and punched the ground in frustration. "This is foolish. When Hinata approaches, we give her the butt, but she doesn't. That's messed up," Kiba grumbled, and Akamaru whimpered in agreement. Shino had already gotten up and was fiddling with his glasses. He had just proven his thoughts with his final try, and Kiba grumbled as he said, "It seems that she limits her attacks solely to those who are moving within a certain area around her spear. Let's try this then. Hinata, back me up." Whispering something into Akamaru's ear, he proceeded to attack Athena, except this time he slowed down and concentrated solely on that, not on getting around her. Hinata stood still for a moment, not knowing quite what to do yet. Kiba's first attack, a clawing swipe at Athena's neck, emboldened her. She activated her Byakugan and jumped into the fray. Hinata tried to hit one of Athena's kidneys while her back was turned, yet she failed as the once deity caught her in the stomach with a mule kick. From here she moved into a cartwheel, stomping a low attacking Kiba into the dirt, who promptly turned into a mass of beetles. Athena backed off before any more could get on her, brushing of the few that had. It was then she noticed the slight wobbling of her naginata. During the brief fight, Akamaru been able to sneak past and was attempting to pull it out of the ground. He struggled even harder when he heard soft footsteps fall right next to him. Athena bent down and gently pried his jaw off the wooden pole. She tossed the dog back to Kiba, who caught him in his arms. Excellent. Have it come to you if you are unable to accomplish a goal. You're starting to think like a real ninja, she said. Should we go on? How on earth are we going to accomplish this? The Aburame heir was assessing their current position as Kiba spoke. Hinata was about 15 feet away from the spear. To his left, he was about halfway closer, but the issue was Athena standing right between him and the naginata, and Kiba was a safe distance behind her, crouching and petting his dog. We can't get close without Athena. Sensei beating the crap out of us, and Akamaru says that thing is really stuck in there. He said, Kiba, try again, only move slowly this time. The Inuzuka yelled, no way, I'm not getting pounded again for no reason. You can sustain the most harm and still fight out of the three of us. You are therefore the most suitable candidate for this experiment, the Aburame retorted coolly. Kiba complained and stood up. I get to be a glorified punching bag, which is great. I'm so excited. He started to put one foot in front of the other, taking great care to move very slowly, and gradually approached the spear until he was within one step of being able to grab it. Kiba lifted his leg and brought it forward and put it down. His entire body flinched as soon as it touched down, and he closed his eyes in case something went wrong. When he felt no pain, he cracked an eyelid. Athena remained exactly where she was, unmoving, and Kiba pumped his fists into the air in triumph. All right. That's terrible, Sensei. We discovered your dumb game. Kiba reached out with his left hand, remembering that he should probably finish the test first so that he could continue his gloating afterwards. Wham! Shino glanced at his partner to make sure there were no significant injuries before focusing on his teacher. Athena turned around and jerked her leg up, booting the boy away. Kiba's clumsy attempts to get back up were accompanied by a series of curses. You broke the rules. The boy's innocence made Athena grin. Observing Hinata's and Kiba's bewildered expressions, she said, No, Shino, I changed them. The test was to touch my naginata, which would normally be impossible for 3 fresh genin, so I placed limitations on myself, she said. I would only assault anybody within 10 feet of it who were going more quickly than a walk. That explains why I first refrained from attacking Hinata, how Akamaru managed to get there, and how Kiba nearly succeeded. At this, her countenance clouded. But the rules have changed. You did well figuring those out, Shino. Anyone who moves will be viciously attacked from now on. The final words were filled with venom, and each child felt panic grip their hearts. Time appeared to stop, and that 1 second became into 10, and then everything happened at once. For your own sakes, wait for time to run out, do not try again. Kiba leapt forward, running so low to the ground that he was nearly on all fours, with Akamaru at his side. Thousands of Kakaichu rose up out of the grass around them, their wings buzzing so loudly that all other sounds were drowned out. Byakugan flaring, Hinata charging, palms pulled back, ready to strike. Nothing could stop these forces as they collided towards a single point. The commotion quickly died down, and the three found themselves alone, with neither Athena nor her weapon in sight. Peace returned, and with it came the sound of gentle applause, and suddenly, behind the youngsters, she materialized, spear on her back. Congratulations, you pass, was Kiba's last straw. Are you serious? What on earth is happening here? You kicked the shit out of us throughout the test after telling us we must pass another pointless test. I get caught off guard and nearly pass. You pass us after we attack, yet you advise us to merely fail. What is the matter with you, lady? By the time his tirade was over, the Inuzuka was gasping for air. My test was divided into 2 sections. Even though they were tired and bruised, Her students listened carefully to what the former goddess of wisdom had to say. But shinobi life is unpredictable, she said. The first question was whether you could figure out my self-imposed weaknesses and if you could think of other strategies other than rushing in mindlessly. Missions are subject to change. Unexpected issues could arise. Indecision kills in these situations. You have to be prepared to make quick decisions when you don't know everything. What you just did was that. Despite not knowing what would happen, you all decided to fight and keep going. You have shown yourself to be worthy. Your training will begin tomorrow. With fatigue, Ino Yamanaka walked into her team's practice area. The sun had not yet risen, and the night sky glistened above her. As she made her way to the center, she discovered Shikamaru dozing off. The lazy slacker most likely spent yesterday and last night sleeping again rather than even making the trip home. She approached him and gave him a kicking kick. Shikamaru opened one eye to gaze at her before closing it and returning to his slumber. Get up, we're supposed to be taking a test, not napping. Knowing from experience how challenging Naruto might be, Ino raged in silence. Choji approached them and said, "Let him sleep, Ino. It's not like sensei is here yet anyways." He was mouthing the food his mother had provided him while he spoke. Ino blew a flyaway hair from her face and crossed her arms. As they waited for their teacher to arrive, the two struck up a conversation, saying, "Whatever. Don't blame me if he fails." Ino was aware that they were all close friends, even though they didn't always act like way. With their families spending so much time together, it was difficult to avoid being. She was happy that she had been placed with the teams and hadn't been shocked when Sensei called them out. While she did lose out on joining Sasuke's squad, there were undoubtedly worse teammates out there. They stopped talking when they heard heavy footsteps. "Troublesome," was mumbled, and Ino found solace in the knowledge that even Shikamaru was anxious, waking up as Sensei showed up. He made them wake up so early for this, and she couldn't help but frown at him. Even worse, the gray-skinned man showed no signs of fatigue. But by the time he stood before them and spoke, any sarcastic remarks had died in her throat. When he looked at Ino, she reluctantly raised a hand and felt her entire body shiver. "We will fight until the sun has fully risen. Anything is allowed." He fixed his unwavering gaze on her and asked, "Isn't that dangerous, Sensei?" The three genin had to leap back when he abruptly materialized in the middle of them, hitting the earth with such power that it created a little tremor. "That is the point. I bleed, you pass. Begin." Ino threw a bunch of shuriken at her teacher after her instincts took over. Shikamaru and Choji shared the same thought, but it was unsuccessful. He just flipped over and allowed the stars to reflect off the blades. At that moment, Ino felt afraid. She threw them at her teacher as if it were insignificant, even though those would have killed a civilian if they had reached their target. The question of whether the everything goes adage also extended to him was more troubling than the realization of her own murderous potential. She turned and ran into the surrounding hills before she had time to think about that subject. If Ino could avoid it, she would not battle that man on his terms. She needed to get back together with Shikamaru and Choji and hope that they could devise a plan. It appears that they were already exchanging ideas in whispers at the foot of one mound. "Troublesome. Of course we would have to fight him while it's dark out. I'm going to be pretty much useless until it gets brighter." He turned toward Ino. She shook her head, asking, "How good have you gotten with Shintenshin no Jutsu?" "I can't do it unless I'm actually touching the person. Besides, Dad forbid me from doing it outside of when I train with him." Shikamaru sighed. Before he could begin, Sensei jumped out of the shadows and used a single round house kick to catch all three in their chests. "Damn. Okay, here's the plan." As they rolled down, nursing their battered ribs, they struck the edge of a hill. He strode forward, stepping on Shikamaru's abdomen. Ino took out a kunai and attempted to stab him in the other leg as he was about to do it again. Instead of striking the Nara, he crushed her wrist into the ground by bringing his foot down behind him. The strain was too great for Ino to wrench her arm free. She was scarcely able to move it. By throwing himself into Sensei's side, Choji saved the day. Ino was able to extricate her arm since Sensei stumbled a little. Shikamaru was already gripping his stomach as he began to crawl away. He was assisted to his feet by Ino, who knelt by him. As retribution for his courage, Choji was punched in the face, breaking his nose. His front side was covered in the red liquid as blood spurted out. Shikamaru battled through the pain and managed to jump away with them after realizing that Ino had gotten him up. Fortunately, they were able to go away unharmed because it appeared that Sensei had had enough of thrashing them. When they arrived at the heart of the pine forest, they eventually stopped running. After arriving, Ino rested Shikamaru against a tree and proceeded to Choji. Drawing from her recollection of the Academy's first aid training, she sliced off a portion of his already blood-stained scarf to remove any more that were leaking out. She pressed it gently onto the crooked nostril after folding it in half. With the kunai in hand, Ino gazed into the Akamichi's tearful eyes. The youngster nodded and opened his mouth enough for her to insert the handle between his teeth. "Choji, this is going to really hurt, so I need you to bite down on this really hard, okay?" she said. Then she put both hands on the cloth over his nose and twisted hard till she heard a slight break. Choji's jaw tightened, and despite his best efforts, a muffled scream continued to escape. She made an effort to apologize, saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." The big lad took the cloth from her hands and nodded slightly. "I know it hurts, Choji, but I need you to hold this there to stop the bleeding. I have to go check on Shikamaru." Ino knelt next to her other companion and crossed over to him. He inquired, "How are you holding up?" She gave him a quick pat on the shoulder. Shikamaru laughed in between breaths and said, "I should be asking you that. You're the one who just got trampled by that guy." Ino raised her right arm and said, "Yeah, I guess, but answering is so much more troublesome. And you know what I mean." Around the wrist, light purples and blues were already beginning to appear. "It'll be fine for now. Nothing's broken. All he managed to do was bruise it really badly," she grumbled. "You know, I just realized something." "What's that?" The Nara's laughter turned into a hiss of sorrow as they said, "We don't even know what our supposed sensei's name is." He glanced at Ino and saw that she was starting to show signs of dread. "Stop trying to make me laugh, you troublesome woman." Ino nodded, suppressing her panic. "Hey, don't worry, I've got a plan." After a short while, Ino and Shikamaru were discovered hiding low under one of the bushes close to the coniferous boundary. Ino played idly with the knife she was holding. "Are you sure you want to do this, Ino? There is another way?" "You said it yourself, Shikamaru. There's no guarantee that way will work. Plus this way works out better in the end." With his arms folded across his tattooed chest, Sensei stood at the base of the slope and said, "Get ready then." Ino assumed that the time he had allotted them had passed. Yes, she was aware that they could only escape and lick their wounds because he allowed them to do so. With careful slowness, he started to march up the bluff. Before long, he was sufficiently close, and Ino hurled her kunai at him. He slammed his fist into her cheek as his face retreated into a scowl. She flew backwards as the kunai slid out of her hand. She closed her eyes and rolled into a fetal posture, protecting her head as best she could while still rolling, after hitting the ground hard. The tag on her weapon detonated during this time, illuminating the surrounding area with a dazzling burst of light. Her pals required some time, so her sensei took a bit to rest. Choji mustered all his might and pushed off into the air, high above one of the tall trees. He yelled, "Expansion Jutsu!" just before he began to fall. His body expanded to 3 times its usual size. When gravity finally set in, he smashed into the demigod. He shouted, "Akamichi body slam!" and hit the ground. A tiny cloud of dust rose from the dry ground and then vanished in an instant. Stunned, Ino looked to see what had happened. This was not what they had anticipated. Sensei remained firmly where he had been. Every muscle in his body appeared to protrude as he steadied himself while grasping a wiggling Choji. The falling Akamichi had been caught by him. The platinum blonde drew her last kunai and shook her head, saying, "Ino, hurry up. I don't know how much longer Choji and I can hold this guy." She grabbed the handle and sprinted toward her pal and sensei. She caught a glimpse of Shikamaru crouching inside the bush with his hands clasped together in the rat seal. She refocused. She lifted the knife above her head and stabbed it down at a pale arm. The point struck the strained bicep in the center and then rebounded. The gray skin would not break, no matter how many times she tried. Out of sheer despair, Ino snatched one of Sensei's swords and wrenched it loose. It should be sharp enough to cut him, she hoped. However, it was not intended to be. The young girl was startled when chains sprang from one of her sensei's arms and fastened to the pommel as soon as the blade was free. Her youthful body and mind were overcome with a searing rage. This was something she had never encountered before. It rooted her in place by penetrating through her. Not just from sensei, but also from his real sword. Ino could feel it gushing out. With a loud cry, sensei shattered free from the Kagemane as she stood still in the emotional conflagration. He threw Shikamaru Choji's enlarged body, and the two of them crashed into a tree. He ripped the sword out of Ino's hand and caught the chain that was emerging from his arm. She was smashed against a hill by an overwhelming, straight kick to the chest. The edges of her eyes were beginning to creep into blackness. Lying on the ground, she vainly fought it off without moving. Ino was semi-conscious when she felt someone grab her by the back of her blouse and drag her sagging body in an unidentified direction. Before she relapsed into blissful unconsciousness, the last sound she heard was a rough voice saying, "You pass. From now on, you three are my apprentices." Naruto and his two colleagues gazed at their new instructor in blankness. They were all on top of the academy, with him leaning on the railings around the building's edge and the pupils seated on the little stairway. It must have been the most lazy introduction they had ever heard. Naturally, their sensei seemed to exude laziness in every way. The first was that he had picked them up more than 2 hours late. Then there was his silver air, standing upright as if he had woken up one day and left it there. He was dressed simply in a dark navy blue long-sleeved shirt, jeans, and gloves. He had a pale green flak jacket on over his breast. His left eye was hidden from view by a mask that covered the bottom portion of his face and his hite, which was slipping off his forehead. They have Kakashi Hitaki as their Junin sensei. He pointed to Naruto and said, "Okay, now it's your turn, starting from the right." Before speaking, the youngster grinned and tinkled with the pommel of his sword. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I like my mom and dad, training, and ramen. I hate how long it takes to sharpen my sword properly. My hobby is training, I guess. As for my dream," he took a moment to think. With a resolute expression on his face, he responded, clutching the leather-bound handle of his blade. Kakashi nodded and turned to face Sasuke. "I want to be the strongest ninja ever. I want to be stronger than even my parents or the old man." Naruto felt a little worried after hearing the Uchiha's speech. "I am Sasuke Uchiha. I hate many things, considering there are very few things that I like. I have no dreams, just a determination to restore my clan and to kill a certain man." He recalled the week at the academy when Sasuke had abruptly vanished and returned entirely altered. He was aware that it was related to what had occurred to his clan, but he was unable to learn anything more. Sakura became aware that it was her turn during the pause that ensued after Sasuke's introduction. She stumbled a little as she said, "Oh, I'm Sakura Haruno. I like reading, listening to music, Naruto, and The pinkette blushed and glanced at Sasuke. Her expression abruptly changed to one of contempt in a dramatic emotional shift. She drifted off again, but this time there was a gentle squeak at the end. "I hate Ino.Pig. My hobbies are studying, watching plays, and shopping. My dream is..." A few seconds later, Kakashi decided she was done and said so. Grinning, Naruto raised a fist into the air and said, "Enough, your teaching will begin tomorrow." "Awesome. What's our first mission?" Kakashi started to amuse himself. "What's so funny?" Sakura and Naruto's jaws fell when he said, "Oh, nothing. I'm just imagining your faces when you find out your mission is actually a mandatory test over half your graduating class will fail." Even Sasuke's head twitched with a startled expression. With a gleam in his visible eye, their teacher exclaimed, "Ah, there it is. Your graduation exam was meant to weed out those with little to no talent at all. This test will show whether you have what it takes to really be shinobi. Here is a map to the training ground where your test will be administered at 7 o'clock sharp. The specifics will be given to you then." His laughter returned as he distributed the papers. He vanished in a cloud of smoke after saying, "And before you go, I would suggest not eating breakfast tomorrow. Unless, of course, you enjoy throwing up." Naruto smiled as he glanced down at the handout and considered the impending conflict. Desperately pushing his way past the morning masses, Naruto ran through the streets of Konoha. Since he was over 2 hours late for his genin test, his only chance of passing was whether his teacher would still allow him to take it. He wasn't even at fault. His father was the main cause of his tardiness. When Dad got home from a meeting with his own team, Naruto was just about to leave. His father insisted that Naruto finish his daily morning spar with him after he had seized him and pulled him back to where they typically trained. He insisted that he had to leave, but he had to battle until his father gave the all clear. His dad's word was final when it came to training. Even if Dad seemed to be easing up on him this morning and last night, it wouldn't matter if he didn't even make it to the test on time. Naruto pushed himself even harder when he saw Training Ground 14 ahead of him, finally sliding to a stop beside the people he saw gathering there. He spat out an apology between pants while placing his hands on his knees. "Sorry, I'm late. My dad kept me too long." He opened his eyes after gathering his breath, only to find Sakura and Sasuke standing there, staring at him. When Sakura noticed his perplexed expression, she responded to the unasked question. Naruto groaned for a long time. "Kakashi Sensei isn't here yet. He's almost 2 hours late now." He would wager anything that the only reason their training lasted so long was because Dad already knew this would occur. With a sigh of frustration, he dropped to the grass, put his head in his hand, and joined the others in waiting. After several minutes, the masked Junin eventually showed up and strolled amiably in the direction of the three. When their teacher saw his students, he waved his right hand lazily in greeting. "Hello, class. You're late." Kakashi disregarded the boys' scowls and Sakura's yell. He approached one of the clearing's 3 tree stumps and took out an alarm clock. He put it down and turned to face the kids. He held up a pair of little silver bells, jingling them slightly for emphasis, and said, "This timer will go off at noon. You have until then to steal one of these 2 bells from me. Whoever does not get one will be tied to the stump until everyone else is done eating lunch, and will be sent back to the academy for another year of schooling. Since there are 3 of you, one of you, at least, will be returning home in disgrace." Their sensei's gaze hardened. "A piece of advice: attack to kill, or you will have no chance of passing this test." Naruto stood up and began extending his arms and legs, saying, "Hey, that's good. It means I won't have to hold back. You had better watch out, sensei." Before answering, Kakashi just looked at the blonde for a while. He tried to enrage the youngster, but Naruto just grinned and pulled a kunai from his holder, saying, "The weakest dog always barks the loudest." The Junin groaned and turned to face his 2 other pupils. "Then I guess I'll just have to show you my bite is much worse than my bark." Sakura didn't want to indicate that she was a little anxious. Sasuke's expression was as expressionless as ever, showing very little sign of emotion. Kakashi could still tell they were both prepared, though, so he yelled, "Begin." As soon as he finished, Sakura and Sasuke fled to the nearby trees to find a hiding spot. Naruto used a different strategy. He charged forward, right at Kakashi, twisting the kunai so that he was holding it in a reverse grip. He went straight between his teacher's knees and sliced at the back of his knee after falling to the ground into a slide from an arm's length distance. Kakashi was taken aback by how vicious the onslaught was. From the beginning, the small youngster was attempting to hamstring him. Sadly for Naruto, the attempt was unsuccessful. Kakashi pulled his left leg out of danger and turned on his right foot. Continuing the attack, Naruto threw the kunai toward his teacher's bare back. Although the silver-haired man could easily avoid it, he had to jump back to avoid being gutted by Naruto's sword pull. In an attempt to throw his teacher off balance and prevent him from retaliating, Naruto pushed forward. He quickly stabbed and slashed with little effect. Using the metal plates on the top of his gloves, Kakashi was able to block the blade or shift out of its path. Kakashi swiftly delivered an open-handed blow to the Jinchuriki's bare chest when Naruto stretched his arm too far out due to one upward slice. Naruto grasped his teacher's wrist with his left hand and leapt into the air as he staggered back a little from the blow. He utilized the arm to gain momentum for his dropkick at Kakashi's face while he was floating. The strike was stopped dead by the disguised Junin using his free forearm. This is what Naruto wanted. He went straight for the final blow while chopping at Kakashi's now exposed torso. It didn't work because Kakashi-sensei used his blocking arm to push on Naruto's legs. The sword barely touched the forest green vest before it followed the rest of the blonde's body as it swung out. But Kakashi was far from done. After prying Naruto's hand free, He hurled the little genin in the direction of the lone tree that stood out of place in the center of the field. For the young Jinchuriki, things only got worse once Naruto crashed into the trunk and tumbled down the side. He was pulled into the air as soon as his left foot struck the ground, and a rope was tied around his ankle. Approaching the dangling youngster, Kakashi calmly took out a book and started reading. "Impressive," he remarked as he turned the page. He ended the conversation short by saying, "But not good enough. If you want to get one of these bells, you need to stop looking at the surface of everything." Naruto had cut him free by swinging his sword at the rope that was binding him while he was speaking. He transformed his drop into a battle roll and tucked into a ball as he went down. He was on one knee at the end, his Xiphos reaching out in front of him and digging into Kakashi's abdomen. At the same time, numerous shuriken and kunai flew out of the tree line and impaled themselves in the left side of the Junin. A damaged log appeared in place of Kakashi, who detonated a moment later into a plume of smoke. With a groan, Naruto put his blade away. Any hope he had of defeating Kakashi Sensei for the time being would have vanished by now. He considered the conflict while he stood by himself in the grassy meadow. He had sensed something was wrong all along, but he was unable to identify it. The mystery was further compounded by his sensei's remarks. Naruto scowled a little and started to head for the trees. He might be able to determine what was worrying Sensei if he could watch his prior fights. Sasuke sped through the dark woodland underbrush, attempting to keep as far away from Kakashi as he could. He had blown his cover with that alleged surprise strike because he was overly eager. No experienced shinobi would have let their guard down so readily, therefore he should have known that Kakashi had pulled a Kawarimi on him and Naruto. Sasuke thought he had gone far enough and paused at the base of a big oak tree to come up with a fresh plan. Sasuke had been impressed by Naruto during that short battle. Since their last encounter, he must have really improved. The Uzumaki had not even approached receiving a bell at that point. What was the implication for Sasuke's chances if Naruto was unable to obtain one? No, that was not his way of thinking. He was better than Naruto. Everyone was aware of that, and Naruto had acknowledged it a few times. Giving up before he had even tried was pointless. Sasuke took a few deep breaths and mentally went over the bout. It was clear that Kakashi was superior to Naruto in terms of taijutsu, and Sasuke had little chance of defeating him. This implied that Naruto's strategy was probably his best bet right now. He would need to get near fast and make Kakashi fight according to his rules. Hopefully, Kakashi's skill at ninjutsu and genjutsu would remain a secret from Sasuke. With his decision set, Sasuke started rushing to his left and retracing his steps in the direction of the clearing. When he arrived, he was shocked to see Kakashi still reading his orange book in the same location, with his hands in his pockets. Sasuke strode out to greet him. He paused a little distance from his teacher and fixed his intense gaze on him. Kakashi did not acknowledge his presence, if he had noticed at all. Sasuke prepared himself, knowing that this was all a ploy to try to irritate him. He would have no better chance than this. His hands quickly joined, swiftly passing through the hand seals required for his initial assault. Sasuke yelled, "Fire style! Fireball jutsu!" as a torrent of flames shot out of his mouth and curled into a huge ball as it traveled toward its target. Kakashi shoved his book back into his bag and leapt out of the way just before the fire hit him. His right hand was behind his back when Sasuke suddenly materialized in front of him, kicking the silver-haired man in the chest. The boy had barely managed to hold onto the jutsu long enough for a fireball large enough to conceal his approach to form before cutting it off, rather than finishing it. Sasuke continued his attack by punching Kakashi in the skull, but Kakashi was able to deflect the kick with his other arm. Sasuke fell after the teacher ducked and swept the leg he was standing on. Sasuke struck out again with his foot while he was in the air, but it was swiftly swatted away. The Uchiha landed hard on the ground but quickly got back up. He was shocked to discover that Kakashi had vanished from his last location. When the ground started to shake under his feet, Sasuke searched for any sign of him. He jumped back in time to see a hand emerge from the soil where he had been standing. Kakashi casually brushed the remaining mud from his clothing as the rest of him came out. The renewed attack from Sasuke cut this short. In an attempt to maintain some sort of pressure, he threw punch after punch. His teacher merely avoided them all without displaying the least amount of anxiety. Finally, he managed to land a swift 1-2 punch combination on Kakashi, which was fast enough to make the Junin block with an arm. Sasuke capitalized on this by using that limb as a temporary platform to leap above Kakashi's head. As he fell, he extended his arm as far as he could, and one of the bells was touched by the very tips of his fingers. Knowing how close he had been, its gentle chime nearly taunted him when it reached his ears. Kakashi's whirling roundhouse snuffed out any more chances he might have had. Eventually, the youngster with the raven hair managed to straighten himself and land safely on the earth after tumbling through the air. Thinking aloud, "You're definitely good," Kakashi said. "You and Naruto have a lot of skill." Sasuke muttered defensively, probably more to himself than to Kakashi, "I'm better than him." When Sasuke realized what his instructor was saying, he threw a kunai at him to try to stop him from leaving, but it went harmlessly through the swirl of leaves the Junin had left behind. "Too bad that I'm going to have to call this fight early then. There's still one more of you I have to check in on." As she worked on one of her hurriedly built traps, Sakura crouched beneath a bush in the center of the jungle. From what she had seen of Naruto and Sasuke's battles with Sensei, she knew that she would not win a bell in a straight-up battle. Her only chance was to entice Kakashi Sensei to come here because she was not nearly as skilled in taijutsu as they were. Sakura would have the upper hand in this situation and might even be able to get a bell for herself and Sasuke. Failure was not an option for her. The pinkette heard a gentle rustle of leaves. Sakura glanced around and saw her teacher reading his book peacefully while strolling through the woods. This would be her greatest chance because the path he was taking would take him directly through the region she had trapped. She reached for one of her strings, then hesitated before pulling it. Would she be able to get a bell, despite the advantage her traps gave her? The odds appeared to be against her. Sakura was startled out of her reverie when Kakashi abruptly vanished in front of her eyes. She lifted her head and frantically searched for him. She spun around, then scurried back in astonishment when she felt someone tap her shoulder. Kakashi Sensei was standing just behind her, crouching down and wearing a menacing expression in his single open eye. Calmly, he formed the rat seal with his hands. Sakura's whole body was exhausted. She made a vain attempt to struggle and to get away. While her eyelids slowly slid downward, her body remained immobile. It seemed as though she had been startled awake in the next instant. She could uncover no sign of Sensei's whereabouts, and he had vanished once more. Sakura sighed with irritation. She would now need to come up with a plan to entice him back here. Thinking it would be simplest to locate him there, the adolescent started to return to the open field. Sakura heard a feeble voice screaming her name as she started to escape. After a little pause, Sakura said, "Sa-ku. Ra." Sasuke had sounded like that. She made her way to the location where the voice seemed to have originated. She froze when she finally got there. Her face had completely lost its color, and she was so terrified that she was unable to even scream. Sasuke was kneeling next to a tall tree, his whole body impaled with several shuriken and kunai. The boy's palm had been pinned to the tree trunk by one of the knives that had even gone right through it. The ground was scarlet with blood that poured freely from the hacked-off portion of his left arm below the elbow. He gasped, the kunai piercing his cheek and garbling the already incomprehensible words, but Sakura had heard them well enough. "Sakura. You have to help Naruto." In addition to understanding what he had said, she somehow knew Naruto's exact location. She glanced down at the blonde kid lying at her feet. Every wound Naruto had sustained was visible because to the nearly torn clothing. His hands were mutilated beyond recognition, and both of his shoulders were dislocated. He had dark maroon splatters of his own blood on top of a tie-dye of blue and black over his chest. The fractured femur on Naruto's right side protruded nearly 3 inches from his thigh. However, that wasn't the worst part. No, his head was the worst part. His head was twisted more than 180 degrees, and the vertebrae in his neck had snapped. It had been under so much stress that tiny skin tears had formed, slowly leaking crimson tears. For Sakura, all of this was too much. This was not intended to occur. This was not how it was meant to be. Before the girl passed out and fell victim to the genjutsu, the fear inside of her finally erupted into a single, powerful scream. Kakashi watched his lone female pupil from a neighboring tree. He questioned whether he had gone a bit too far, but a piercing ringing startled him out of his reverie. Sakura was in no condition to walk back towards the activated alarm clock, so the Junin leapt down and snatched her up. It was an odd sight to see at Training Ground 14 just after noon on that particular day. Kakashi Hatake was painstakingly unstacking the 3 lunchboxes he had packed while seated cross-legged on the ground. Sakura, Sasuke, and Naruto were all chained to 3 posts across from the Junin, seeing their sensei at work. Naruto never stayed motionless for long, occasionally straining against the chains holding him. The children hung their heads low, anticipating his words. "Now, before I begin eating the food that you 3 so kindly decided to give back to me, I think I will tell you the results of the test." The fact that some people's tummies began to growl at the mere mention of food just made it worse. The sound caused Kakashi to laugh a little. Hope for the Genins was rekindled as the speaker said, "First off, you should know that all of you have much potential. Perhaps they have a chance." Kakashi's voice abruptly softened and took on a sinister tone as he said, "But that doesn't matter, because I will personally make sure that none of you become ninja." After Kakashi glared at Naruto, he suddenly clammed up, asking, "What the hell? Why do you have it out for us?" "Sakura," he added, directly addressing the pinkette, "you let your doubts and fears cloud your judgment. You were so scared of failing that instead of luring me into your traps yourself or getting someone to help you, you simply stayed put and hoped I would stumble into one. Sasuke, your overconfidence in your own abilities meant you did not even consider a task might be over your head, even after watching Naruto's fight with me. You gambled everything on the hopes that you by yourself would be enough. And Naruto, you had a good idea to focus on me and not on the bells, but you took it too far. You lost yourself in the battle and forgot your objective. I even left open a few opportunities for you to try for one, but instead you continued fighting, consumed by your lust for combat." He turned around and approached the big stone memorial behind him cautiously, saying, "I should flunk all of you right now. Why should I bother training children who cannot see what is right in front of them? If you are not prepared for what this world would throw at you, then you will only get yourselves and others killed. This memorial is dedicated to all those who died in service to the village they loved and cherished. Punks like you have no right to bear the title of shinobi like they did." He approached the genin and chopped off the 2 ends, saying, "But I will give you another chance. Naruto, your mistakes were the most serious, and as punishment you may not eat anything." After saying his piece, Kakashi picked up his food and left 2 boxes behind. "Sasuke and Sakura, you may have lunch and regain your strength, but do not even think about giving Naruto any or there will be dire repercussions." For the time being, the 3 disheartened genin were left alone. There was a brief period of silence before Naruto eventually broke it. As he kicked his stump in exasperation, he yelled, "Darn it, that's what was bugging me." Sasuke gave him a raised eyebrow. After glaring at Sasuke for the remark, Naruto clarified, "What are you talking about, loser?" As if it were the most obvious thing in the world, he declared, "Sensei's a Junin." At the blonde, Sasuke raised an eyebrow. Naruto sighed and shook his head, asking, "So what?" Sakura's expression brightened as realization dawned on her. "So what? So, that means he's the same rank as my parents, and my parents run me into the ground so often it's basically our family bonding time." Naruto nodded his head, still berating himself in his mind for not realizing sooner. "You're saying he was going easy on us?" Sakura's feelings were only made worse by this realization. Guilt grew inside her until it became unbearable, and she lowered her head low in shame. She muttered something like, "I'm sorry." She shocked Naruto by saying, "You both were out fighting to get a bell, and all I did was get caught in a genjutsu." He turned to face Sasuke, anticipating his response as well. "Are you kidding me, Sakura? You know how much I suck at genjutsu. If you couldn't get out of it, there's no way I would have." A few seconds went by. At last, Naruto lost patience and twisted his body to kick Sasuke in the shin. The Uchiha gave him a glare but gave in. "None of us were able to get a bell, so we all failed. The reasons why are unimportant." The loud growls from Sakura's and Sasuke's stomachs cut short this moment of team building. Naruto chuckled at their humiliation until the 2 of them combined kicks silenced him. Sakura looked at the meal that was placed next to her, her cheeks flushed. Naruto merely laughed at her response. "Go ahead. You 2 can eat. You don't have to worry about me." The others gave him a disbelieving look, not believing what they perceived to be an act of toughness. Sakura inquired somewhat anxiously, You can't mean that, Naruto. You can't say you're not the least bit hungry. She had no hope from the moment she received the bell. Thus it was unjust that Naruto was the one penalized for his actions during the exam. Although it would be detrimental to all of them, taking this hit for Naruto was the most beneficial thing she could do. Naruto responded, "Nah, this is nothing." Sakura was taken aback when she said, "I've gone days without food sometimes when I've had to train with my dad. What sort of parent would harm their own child in that way?" She let out a gasp and said, "That's horrible." Naruto merely shot her a questioning glance. He said with a look of pure nostalgia, "Are you kidding? It was awesome. I got to spend whole days just training and spending time with my dad. Why would I want to take a break from that just to eat a little food?" Sasuke had become more reserved than normal during the final portion of the conversation. For the Uchiha, Naruto's brief discussion about his parents had evoked unpleasant memories. It was particularly painful when he brought up training with them. To get his thoughts straight, Sasuke shook his head rapidly. He was aware of where such ideas would lead him, where that mental route would take him. Since that night, it has been useless to reminisce about those moments. The tense stillness that had followed Naruto's final query was broken by the sounds of him shuffles as he refocused. Sasuke handed the blonde his meal after opening it and dividing out roughly a third of it. Sakura and Naruto just gazed at him as though he had grown a second head overnight. He became so irritated that he yelled, "Are you going to eat or not?" Sakura had the confidence to initiate contact after witnessing Sasuke do it. Using her chopsticks, she lifted a small portion of rice and placed it in front of Naruto's mouth. Naruto was only further perplexed by this. Naruto turned his head away from the food and asked, "What are you guys doing? Do you know what will happen if Kakashi-sensei sees you?" The Jinchuriki looked at Sakura, who nodded her head in agreement. "Face it, loser. Even if you can go that long without eating, you'll be more useful if you're not starving. Besides, I do not sense Kakashi anywhere near here." Finally, he opened his mouth to bite on it. A huge conflagration of wind and smoke in front of them stopped him. Kakashi shook from its depths, his whole body shaking with rage. The silver-haired man, relishing the ease with which he could manipulate his students' emotions, declared, "You three have disobeyed my orders, and for that, you pass. Maybe it wouldn't be that horrible to have a team." Kakashi Hitaki sat peacefully by himself at an otherwise empty table, turning casually through the pages of his beloved book as he finished them. The Leafs Junin gathered around him, chatting, laughing, and generally drinking under the table as they moved about the packed bar. Once a year, Konoha's elite would come together here to socialize and catch up. As he listened to Asuma Sarutobi's most recent horror tale, Kakashi chuckled quietly. This incident always followed the genin examinations for a purpose. Due to the sheer size of each graduating class, the likelihood of receiving a poor team was very high. Many years ago, it became customary for the shinobi to gather and share stories about their personal encounters with a bad team because they had so many terrifying tales to share. As the front door to the packed dive opened, there came the harsh ringing of a bell. For a few seconds, all sound stopped, but soon enough, the other customers resumed their activities. A woman approached Kakashi as he slid one of the other seats at his table out, not even raising his head from his book. He teased, "Still causing a scene even when you don't mean to, huh?" Athena crossed her legs and took a seat on the provided chair. "Is my appearance here really so surprising?" Athena grinned when she said, "Well, you have to admit that you and your housemate aren't the most sociable of people." Indeed. After a few period of comfortable stillness, a waitress approached and inquired whether Athena had any orders. Kakashi chose to break the silence after a courteous rejection. Athena gave him a fake, naive smile in return and asked, "So, anything you want to warn me about your son before I begin teaching him?" "I am not quite sure what you mean. Has something happened?" Athena had to chuckle when she heard the remark. "Oh no, it's just that I've never run into a genin so willing to cripple and gut me right off the bat. Usually it takes a few days of tardiness and poor excuses to do that." "Yes, that sounds like Naruto. He is definitely taking after his father." When she said that, Kakashi's face displayed a strange range of emotions, but his mask and forehead protector kept the majority of them hidden. The former goddess laughed and shook her head, saying, "In other words, I have to watch out, or he will try to cram a lightning bolt down my throat next time." Luckily for you, No, Naruto's training routine has mostly been the same one Kratos went through when he was young. We focused on his taijutsu, conditioning, and swordsmanship as his father's ninjutsu are still far out of his league, and my illusions would hardly fit his fighting style. Kakashi heard everything and immediately recognized an opportunity. He could wake up from a terrifying genjutsu, but the opportunity was too excellent to miss. With his distinctive eye smile fixed firmly in place, he remarked, "That's the cover you sticking to, I can't imagine any other reason you might want to focus on Naruto's taijutsu training." Athena was actually taken aback by what he was hinting at, and became a little agitated. She quickly collected herself and responded to him. Kakashi laughed at her response, saying, "While, yes, Guy did lend a small hand when it came time for sparring practice, Kratos was and has always been Naruto's main teacher. If the pub hadn't started to abruptly disintegrate around him, he would have kept making jokes." He thought, damn, he had let his enjoyment get the better of him. Kakashi let out a sigh and prepared for whatever torments Athena could have in store for him this time. Well, at least it was worthwhile. Hiruzen Sarutobi stood quietly on top of the Hokage tower across the village, inhaling deeply from his lit pipe. He exhaled gently as he watched the cold night breeze gradually carry the smoke away. Hiruzen removed the pipe from his mouth and tapped the flickering ashes out over the building's side, saying, "Tsunade would have a fit if she knew you were still smoking at your age, sensei." After running a hand through his long, white hair, the Toad Sennin stepped forward and placed his hands on the rooftop railing beside the Hokage, saying, "It is good you came here so quickly, Jiraiya." His teacher's tone made it clear to him that jokes were not appropriate at this moment. "Yeah. I was already on my way back through this area when I got your message. So, Danzo has been rearing his ugly head again." Jiraiya cringed at the idea of that man being close to his godson. It would seem so. Either that, or someone else has found a way to disrupt my observation jutsu. I am inclined to believe the former. Hiruzen's next statements made his face even more nasty. Naruto has learned of the Kyuubi. The Toad Sennin already anticipated the response when he responded, "I thought you said something was causing interference with your jutsu." Gray brows tightened at the names of the former gods. Kratos and Athena informed me about it after they checked on him. Sarutobi could perceive his students' emotional swings with ease. "You still do not completely trust them, do you, Jiraiya?" He stood up straight and answered, 6 years. My contacts have been asking around for 6 years, yet they haven't been able to find anything about them. Not a single damn thing, sensei. It's like they just appeared from thin air the day they came to Konoha." Sarutobi gave a nod. The Sannin turned to face the old man and said, "It is unusual." "What do you know, sensei?" Every time Jiraiya came back to Konoha, they performed the same old song and dance. "I know enough, Jiraiya." He would often get shut down as he tried to get information out of his teacher. Jiraiya would eventually give up and rely on his sensei's wisdom. Furthermore, Jiraiya had to acknowledge that jealousy was a contributing factor in his mistrust of them, despite the fact that he had other good reasons. When Jiraiya learned that he would not be permitted to adopt Naruto, his heart had already been further shattered by the deaths of Minato and Kushina. They were unable to formally designate him as one of Naruto's legal guardians as the married couple had both passed away that evening. Everyone close to the spouses knew who they were going to pick, so it was just a minor detail, but Danzo wanted it. He then utilized that information to force the orphanages to reject his adoption requests after preventing the Sannin from immediately taking possession of the boy. Jiraiya knew it was all that bastard's fault, but it was supposedly because of his many absences and known depravity that he would be a poor caretaker. Jiraiya's introspection had brought him back to the first reason he was here. "So what do you want me to do?" "Nothing for right now. I have warned Kratos and Athena to be on the lookout for anything suspicious, and Kakashi will be sure to keep a close eye on Naruto. Should Danzo continue to contact him, you may need to take Naruto on as your apprentices sooner than we had planned." Sarutobi reached out to touch his pupil's back. He turned and started to walk away, saying, "Remember to stop by for a drink before you leave again. Do not worry, Jiraiya. Everything will work out for the best." The Sennin Toad laughed. His sensei was true when he said that he always knew how to lift him out of a bad mood. He had never benefited from brooding. He was Mount Myobuku's famous Toad Sage, Jiraiya. He didn't have time to ponder such issues because he was coveted by women and envied by men. He had an empty notepad, a full wallet, and was eager to conduct some study in the largest village of all. As the days stretched into weeks and finally months, Konoha's life went on. Team 7 had just finished their most recent mission and was making their way back to the Hokage Tower. The afternoon sun was shining above them, illuminating the village with its golden glow. The sky was clear blue and unclouded. Naruto held a tan cat with a bow on its left ear by the scruff of its neck as he led the group. He was careful to maintain a safe distance from the beast. Continually resisting her captor's hold and attempting to rip her small claws into him, the cat refused to leave quietly. The remainder of the crew followed, with the other genin closely watching the cat in case she broke free for the 6th time. As they were ready to enter the building, Team 8 members appeared as the doors were opened from the inside. The genin squads were silent for a moment until a shrill cries broke the stillness. "Ah! Damn it!" Tora rotated her lower body to claw Naruto behind the eyes with her back paws after sensing a tiny easing of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki's grip. Surprised, Naruto dropped the cat and hid his face. The other groups were startled out of their trance by this. Kiba burst out laughing, and Naruto's comrades rushed to seize the cat. Tora immediately jumped across his face, stopping his laughter. She chose to vent her pent-up irritation on the first thing she spotted rather than attempting to flee once more. The Inuzuka was too unfortunate to receive the short straw from fate. Desperate to get the cat off his head, Kiba staggered back. Akamaru rushed into the battle to support his companion. He grabbed Tora's tail and leapt out of Kiba's jacket, pulling the furious feline with him. When they struck the ground, Akamaru released the furry appendage and they started to square off. Growls flooded the air and hair pricked straight up. Though somewhat grudgingly on Sasuke's part, these pre-fight intimidations were quickly stopped when he and Kiba picked them both. The sun-kissed blonde took his hands off his face and looked up to see Hinata Hyuga standing a few feet away. Are you all right, Naruto?" he asked. Her index fingers were pressed together in front of her face as she gazed carefully at the ground beneath her feet. Raising up, Naruto brushed the grime off his trousers. "Yeah, I'm fine. It's not that bad. I really only covered my face as a reflex. Good thing Tora hates dogs, or we might have had to catch her all over again." He was chuckling. Hinata blushed a little because she was actually speaking to her crush, but before she could say anything more, Kiba interrupted. Despite all of the minor wounds covering his face, the Inuzuka stalked up to Naruto and asked, "You think that was funny, Uzumaki?" Uzumaki smiled at the other youngster and said. Tension increased as the two butted heads and said, "No, I think it was hilarious, mutt." Had it not been for a chill that Kiba was starting to recognize and Naruto was familiar with running down their spines, this would have gone on. Athena was standing next to them, staring down at the guys with a severe expression. She gave a nod of encouragement as they quickly retreated a few paces. She turned to Kakashi and spoke to her fellow Junin. She apologized, but the masked man brushed her off with a casual, "Forgive us for disrupting your team's mission, Kakashi. We did not mean to cause you any hindrances." His students scowled at him for saying, "Meh, don't worry about it. I'm sure it would not have been that hard to recapture her." They could still clearly recall him casually leaning against a tree while they pursued that fur-covered irritation. At last, Kiba found the nerve to ask with a smile, "Are you done for today, or are you taking your squad on another D rank?" Naruto gaped at his fellow genin and said, "Nope, we get the rest of the day off to prep for our C rank tomorrow." He turned to his sensei and said, "What, no fair?" Invoking all of his residual attractiveness, the blonde put on his best puppy dog eyes. Kakashi stroked his chin in a mocking tone of thought, "Can we get a C rank next, pretty please, 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 please." The reality was that he believed they were prepared for it and had been intending to request one after this trip, but they didn't need to know that. "I don't know, C ranks can be incredibly dangerous." Thus started a confrontation between the learner and the teacher, neither of whom wanted to be the first to concede. If a loud shout hadn't interrupted their contest, this would have gone on forever. Dynamic entry. Kakashi and Naruto's eyes grew wide. As they attempted to identify the intended target, their bodies became immobile. They sighed in relief. The next second Athena retreated a little to let an airborne might guy fly by her innocuously, only inches away. With his thumb pointing upward, the crazy Junin held out his left hand before skidding to a stop and spinning. A most youthful dodge, Athena. Your reaction time is as good as ever. With a note of irritation in her voice, she said, "Hello, Guy. I would ask that, in the future, you refrain from ambushing me while I am with my team." The man wearing spandex raised his left hand and firmly held it out in front of him in a thumbs up, saying, "Certainly. Forgive me if I interfered with you teaching your most youthful students." He gave a huge smile and winked, reaffirming the vow in his thoughts. Sakura and Sasuke looked at Team Aid to see if they understood what was happening while they stared in shock at the strange stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. They were shocked to discover that their fellow genin appeared to be just as disoriented as they were. In contrast, Naruto was quickly making connections in his mind. Naruto quickly pulled his Xiphos, moved the blade behind his shoulder, and stopped the ninjutsu from cutting him diagonally if Guy was present. This would indicate that the remainder of his team had returned from their operation. There was a sharp clang as the two swords collided. "Hey, Tenten. It's nice to see you too." With a loud chuckle, Guy flung back his head and said, "Darn it, Guy. Sensei, you messed up my sneak attack." During that conversation, Naruto and Tenten kept fighting against one another. "Do not despair, my dear Tenten. Our failure is only motivation to work even harder so that next time our flames of youth will burn even brighter and light our way to victory." Tenten clenched her teeth and attempted, without success, to dominate the smaller kid. To make her unsteady, Naruto relaxed the grip on his blade. To his left, the kunoichi staggered forward. He turned around behind her, and her ninjutsu glided by the blonde. Tenten was quickly pulled into a huge bear hug by him as he grabbed her wrists and pinned them to her chest. When her companion spanned his back and lifted her off the ground, suspending her in the air, she had few choices because her ninjutsu had fallen out of her grasp. She cried, "Put me down, Naruto." The nine-tailed Jinchuriki just turned to face his colleagues and smiled. "Uchiha, Sakura, look what I caught. Can we keep her?" He teased, and the result was two different things right away. Sasuke and Sakura relaxed because they had stiffened up and drawn their kunai in case Naruto required assistance defending himself against the random, assaulting chick. In the second, Tenten fought even harder and finally used a foot to catch the blonde in the shin. As soon as he received the message, Naruto dropped her back down. After exchanging brief glares, the two burst out laughing and embraced. As his teammates separated from the main group and went up to the longtime friends, Naruto remarked, "Tenten, these are my teammates. Sakura Haruno and Sasuke Uchiha." "Sakura and Sasuke, this is Tenten Suzuki. We've known each other for years." As she shook off the dust from the fallen ninjutsu she had stooped to gather, Tenten waved to them. Sakura knew right away that she didn't like the other female. Since they had only recently met, she was unable to determine why, but she remained silent. Since Naruto was clearly very close to the pinkette, she did not want to offend him. Tenten ignored Naruto's outrage at her moniker for him and said, "So you two were the ones paired up with the Munchkin?" Sakura nodded, and the Uchiha merely grunted to indicate that he had heard her. He may be an idiot at times. Well, most of the time, but don't worry. The good outweighs the bad, usually. At this time, Tora took the initiative. The cat, ignored by her collar during the strange ordeal, had gotten her neck in the right position to start biting through her collar. When she did, Tora sprung to her feet, rushing away as if the Shinigami himself were chasing after her. Team 7 could only gape in the direction their mission had just taken when they discovered she had done this. As the three went off again to rescue the cat, Naruto moaned to Tenten, "I guess I'll see you later." They all quietly cursed whatever evil had created such a beast. The elder girl tried not to giggle as she watched them leave. In between episodes, she was able to call out before they vanished. "Don't forget we're having dinner at Uncle's house tonight, Naruto. Come, Tenten, we must hurry if we wish to finish our youthful laps around Konoha before conditioning this evening. If we cannot do that, we shall run an extra 10 laps afterwards. The flames of youth must be even stronger in the future if we are to defeat our numerous rivals." Tenten's glee vanished at the sound of her sensei's yells. To be honest, she had no idea who would be in worse shape now, her or Naruto. Team 8 stood in the Hokage Tower's encroaching shadow as the teacher. Student duo took flight. Kiba looked around in confusion and asked Shino the question. For once, Shino's peaceful demeanor had nothing to do with his silence. What the hell just happened? Team 7 eventually arrived at the mission assignment desk 3 hours later. Tora had been apprehended again and taken back to her owner. The three genin were waiting for their team to be called for their next assignment, off to the side, close to a corner of the room. Sasuke stood a few feet away, leaning against one of the walls with his eyes closed, while Sakura and Naruto sat on the ground, gazing into space. When it came to waiting around here, Kakashi was off somewhere else doing whatever it was he did. Other shinobi swarmed around them, producing a muted noise that provided the kids with a lot of discussions to listen in on, which served to relieve some of their boredom. Fortunately for them, a well-known shout quickly interrupted the tedium. Sasuke. Ino Yamanaka quickly wrapped her arms around Sasuke's neck from the right side as she emerged from the crowded crowd. When Sakura saw her rival drape herself over her crush, a fire ignited in her eyes, and she rushed forward to grab the platinum blonde away from the lad. "I haven't seen you in so long. Did you miss me?" Sakura asked. Ino released herself from Sakura's hold and protruded her tongue at her, saying, "Get off him, pig. Sasuke doesn't want you getting your stench all over him." The females calmly scowled at one another before launching obscenities at one another with new vigor. "Go away, forehead. It's obvious that Sasuke would rather spend time with me after having to look at your ugly face every day." When Sasuke and Naruto turned to face the front, they noticed that Shikamaru and Choji, the other two members of Team 10, had joined them. "Man, this is such a drag." Shikamaru looked at Sakura and Ino with annoyance and stroked the back of his neck. "Do they have to do this every time they're around each other?" Naruto laughed and remarked, "To be honest, I would be afraid if they didn't." At that moment, he became aware of the bruises and scrapes that covered the Team 10 boys. "What happened to you guys? You look like you just got your butts handed to you." Shikamaru gave a straightforward response, "Our sensei, that's what happened." His bones remembered how tired he truly was, and his posture sagged even further than normal. Choji replaced his companion when he refused to go into additional detail. Between mouthfuls of potato chips from the package he had just opened, he remarked, "Kratos. Sensei has been running us into the ground almost every day. Even training with my clan was never this tough." Naruto regarded the lads doubtfully and said, "Oh yeah, I forgot you got my dad for a teacher." Shikamaru and Choji stared at the sun-kissed blonde, saying, "It can't be that bad for you guys." Naruto was the only person who could have understood what they had been going through. They found his assertion so astonishing that it even distracted Ino from her argument with Sakura. She made the decision to voice her opinion right away. Ino squawked, arguing with another member of Team 7 right away. "Are you kidding me? During our genin test he badly bruised the bones in my wrist and cheek, shattered Choji's nose, and nearly crushed Shikamaru with Choji's expanded form. He ended up having to take us to the hospital to treat everything." Naruto shrugged his shoulders and shot the Yamanaka a deadpan expression. "Yeah, and?" Ino grabbed her hair angrily and hissed. Naturally, there was nothing wrong with that photo in the eyes of the youngster who had lived with Sensei for years. It seemed to Shikamaru that the Uzumaki had grown a second head overnight. "I think you just need to calm down for a little while. He's really nothing but a giant softie once you get to know him." He shook his head in frustration, understanding the futility of attempting to explain that reality to his fellow genin. "Naruto, I used to think my mother was single most troublesome person in the world, but your dad proved me wrong." He let out a sigh. The shinobi with the pineapple hair shook his head, saying, "And now Sensei wants us to throw us into a C-rank mission already for some reason. This is all such a drag." He had always aspired to be an average shinobi and live an average life, but now he had two individuals in his life who were encouraging him to truly labor. The Nara finally succumbed to exhaustion and fell on the ground. His hands were beneath his head as he lay stretched out. Shikamaru saw little use in carrying on that conversation any longer while his sensei was away on their next expedition. Right now, his only concern was taking one of his favorite naps, which he had been cruelly denied far more frequently over the previous few months. Naruto's subsequent remarks completely crushed his expectations. "Hey, Dad." Kratos greeted his adopted son with a nod. He had arrived in time to hear Shikamaru's final words and had gone back to his squad to dismiss them for the day. The boy with the black hair received a glare from the demigod. Shikamaru struggled to swallow the knot that had risen in his throat and nodded that he understood. "If that is how you feel, Nara, do not bother attending the next mission. You will only get our way." Kratos vanished in a puff of smoke as swiftly as he had emerged. "We leave at dawn tomorrow. Anyone not there will be left behind." Team Kakashi was brought forward to receive their mission after a few tense minutes. Before making their way to the assignment desk, Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke bid Team Kratos farewell in their individual ways. Kakashi was already waiting for them in front of the Hokage when they arrived. As they approached, the elderly leader grinned at them. Sarutobi picked up a stack of papers and shuffled through them. "Good job successfully capturing Toriyu 3. Let me see here," he said. "For your next mission, you may help an elder woman clean out her gutters, help weed a farmer's crops, or aid a daycare that is currently shorthanded." Gazing into his student's eyes with a secret smirk, Kakashi remarked, "Actually, Lord Hokage, I think my team is ready for a C-rank mission." He set down the files he had been holding and said, "Do you know? Well then, I'll look and see what I have." A voice interrupted him as he was rummaging through a smaller stack. Naruto turned to face the man who had just said, "If I may, Lord Sarutobi, I believe I have the perfect mission for this team." When they had entered, he had been discussing something with the Hokage, but Naruto had not given him any attention. Naruto was immediately struck by the adult's well-roundedness. Although some of his girth was concealed by his loose robes, it was obvious that he could tolerate the occasional missed meal. Such attire was far more flamboyant than Naruto usually saw, and it was incredibly elegant in both style and design. Thick navy blue stripes separated the medium-sized, dark purple diamonds on the fabric. His undershirt and trousers were both bright yellow, which made them look terrible with the rest of his outfit. His hands were stubby and ornamented with a pair of rings. He was dressed in traditional sandals made of finely carved wood. The individual was at least in his late 40s in terms of his other physical characteristics. Under a sharply receding hairline, tiny wrinkles were starting to appear on his face. On top of his round head, the remnants of his jet black hair were flat. He was a little shorter than normal in height and had dark brown eyes. He had a thick, short neck that was nearly invisible. A warm smile tugged his mouth higher. "Are you sure, Mr. Fukui? I know before you were considering a more experienced team of Chunin for your mission." Hiruzen asked. Sarutobi's worries were dismissed by the man known as Mr. Fukui. However, the third Hokage did not appear persuaded. Yes, you're right, but there is no need to worry. I'm sure they will be able to handle it. Besides, it is not every day one is able to hire the Kakashi Hitaki for such a low price." He was speaking to the Junin. "This is Mr. Akihiro Fukui. Recently the lands near his estate on the eastern edge of the Land of Fire have seen an increase in raids by group of organized bandits. He wishes to hire a team to escort him back to his home and guard his residence until his own private forces are able to put down the marauders. I leave the decision to you, Kakashi." The man with silver hair rested his face on his palm as he pondered the matter. It appeared to be rather simple. Hopefully, the client was handling the issue on his own, so they wouldn't even need to do anything on this mission. However, for a Genin team's first C-rank task, the mission might be a little too significant. "We accept, Lord Hokage." Ultimately, Kakashi believed his students were capable and that he could always intervene and assist if things got out of control. The elderly man gave a nod. "Very well then. Here are the mission scrolls with more details. Review them tonight and meet Mr. Fukui tomorrow morning at 9 at the eastern main gate. Good luck." Kiba raised his arms to the morning sky and let out a huge yawn. The crimson sun had just started to rise above the horizon. While he waited for his sensei at the northern gate, most of Konoha remained soundly asleep in their dormitories. The other genin of Team 8 were around the young Inuzuka. Kiba knew they were as exhausted as he was, even though they weren't as outspoken about it. Hinata was seated on one of the several benches that bordered the streets of Konoha. Her head would occasionally bob down slightly as she dozed off, only to shoot back up a few seconds later when she woke up, and her hands were folded neatly in her lap. With his back to a towering oak, Shino stood the furthest away. Any overt symptoms of weariness were concealed by his sunglasses and collared jacket, but Kiba could see his friend's small movements suppressing a yawn of his own. Every child was carrying a bulging backpack. The slumbering shinobi were startled out of their reverie by the sound of gentle footsteps that heralded their sensei's abrupt entrance. Athena said, "Good morning, students." They all chimed, "Good morning, sensei," together. I am glad to see you are all here on time and ready to go. Our mission is in a small village on the border between the land of fire and the land of rice paddies. Once we arrive there, we are to help the local law enforcement with their job for a month. Kiba laughed and raised his fist. Athena's penetrating eyes met the Inuzuka's and he hastily closed his mouth. Awesome. Our first real mission, and we get to chase down thieves and murderers for a whole month. Hinata murmured softly, stuttering now and then, that will be highly unlikely. Ibaraki's population has only recently risen above 2,000 and possesses a very low crime rate. The former goddess grinned at her pupil and said, Sensei, if that's true, then why would they need us to help the police work? The compliments made the girl flush. An excellent question, Hinata. Many of the smaller villages in the elemental nations to act as law enforcement for two main reasons. The first is that it frees up manpower the town can use for other tasks such as farming, blacksmithing, etc. Secondly, shinobi are better equipped to handle an average criminal as well as any more serious threats that may turn up than regular enforcers. The three genin nodded with comprehension. Normally, assignments such as this last anywhere from 6 months to a year. Athena went on. Since this is the first time Ibaraki has approached Konoha for such a commission, however, the length has been greatly reduced. As Shino concluded for his teacher, the Junin nodded, allowing Ibaraki to decide whether it wishes to continue working with Konoha or do business with a different hidden village. Precisely, Shino. As such, I expect all of you to do your absolute best to ensure Ibaraki will continue its business with our village. Do you understand? Her staff replied, yes, ma'am. Athena answered, then let us head out. Kiba, Hinata, and Shino trailed behind her as she turned and started to walk toward the enormous entryway. Name 5 countries that border the land of fire. The land of rivers, the land of hot springs, the land of tea, the land of grass, and the land of waterfalls. Good. What landmarker did we pass close by yesterday, Kiba? The Valley of the End. Correct, and why is it famous, Hinata? It is where the Shodem Hokage fought Madara Uchiha for control of Konohagakure. Excellent. Now, Kiba, what is the major export of the land of rice paddies? Rice? Incorrect, Shino, alcoholic beverages. More specifically sake, also known as rice wine. Oh, come on. That was a trick question. 2 days have passed since Team 8's first C-rank mission began. Athena had halted the children's daily physical exercise during this period to prevent them from exhausting themselves and being unable of walking afterwards. In order to make up for this, the former goddess had started testing the three on a variety of topics while they were on the road. Each child knew better than to be caught slacking off, yet there were no consequences for giving the wrong response. Even the most hardened shinobi would hesitate for a time under Athena's icy look. The faint form of a huge hamlet peeked out between the trees a little distance in ahead of the group. Anything beneath the canopies had a greenish tint from the mid-morning sun that soaked the leaves. As Team 8 marched on, the shinobi's footsteps were muted by the soft dirt road. The damp soil sank slightly under their weight, leaving shallow imprints behind them. The Konoha ninjas soon arrived on Ibaraki's outskirts. An old man with a protruding fabric sack draped over his right shoulder was seen approaching the wooden gate. He held a big walking staff in his left hand, which was taller than his stooped frame. He wore a little cap over his bald head to shield the delicate skin. He was dressed in a pale red robe with darker hues around the edges. The man's face was profoundly wrinkled, and his beautiful green eyes were nearly hidden by his crinkled brow. His socked feet were ornamented with leather sandals. While walking, he hummed softly, pausing occasionally to speak with the civilian guard stationed at the entrance. After a brief exchange of words, the younger man gestured toward the shinobi that was approaching. A smile came across the man's face as he turned to face them, and he showed that the right side of his mouth was missing a tooth. The elder yelled, "Well, hello there, travelers. What brings the 4 of you out to our little town?" "Good morning, sir. We are here to help your prefect in his or her duties. Would you mind taking us to their office?" Athena replied in answer. There was a cackle from the man. "I'll be damned. You must be them Konoha shinobi. Hey, yeah, I can show you where to go, seeing as it'd be me you're looking for." Kiba responded with skepticism. After Athena flicked his ear, The Inuzuka yelled, "Are you sure? But you're so OL, ow." The man merely laughed once more and waved his hand, saying, "Do not be rude, Kiba." He turned aside and began to leave, saying, "Bah, forget it. It's part of the reason I've started hiring your type to help me out. Name's Hiroshi Sato, but y'all can call me Hiro. Come on now, I'll show you around." Just behind him, Athena gestured for her students to follow. Ibaraki's main thoroughfare was bustling inside the wooden fortifications. People greeted one another as they passed, moving quickly down the sides to their destinations. As they dragged their loads around the hamlet, out to the neighboring fields, or back from them, wooden carts pulled by oxen clogged the center. Above the entire commotion, boisterous vendors shouted out their different pricing. Every street has a small house at its edge. They were all brown, albeit the hue differed according on the kind of wood that was used to build them. Except for the one in the middle of the village, none of them were higher than 2 floors. The 3-story building appeared even taller than it actually was, since it was perched on a small hill with a view of the hamlet. A smooth dome in the middle joined to the 2 wings in back and on either side. The majority of the front was naked, but the entryway was outlined by a lovely wood sculpture that Athena surmised was a history of the village and some local folklore. The shinobi were guided in the direction of this building, but they made very little headway. It appeared that the elderly man who was purportedly their client could not get more than 2 feet before stopping to talk to a passerby. After a while, the prefect would recall his earlier actions and excuse himself to proceed. The brilliant sun was nearly at its zenith for the day by the time the group arrived at the elaborate doorway. To let them in, the elderly man took a set of keys out of his pocket. He escorted Team 8 in as the doors opened smoothly. Hiroshi escorted them to his roomy office, where he sat behind his battered desk and rested his walking stick against the rear wall. The bulky bag was placed next him. With a long sigh of relief, he turned to face the shinobi assembled in front of him while Hinata silently closed the door. Kiba was going to voice the words, "Well now, I reckon it's time we got down to business." But then he remembered his sensei's admonition. "Bottom line, I'm getting too damn old to be chasing after young'uns all day long. That's where you 4 come in. Not much to do for the most part, except wander around the village and make sure nothing happens. Ibaraki's a pretty quiet place for the most part, but sometimes people just lose their heads over little things." Athena nodded with understanding. She said, "Where will our lodgings be during our stay here?" Hiroshi interrupted himself in the middle of his statement when the office door opened. "Y'all'll be stayin' at my house fair the time bein'. We got plenty of a room up on the old flat. My house is a little ways up yonder, near the north gate. Past that is the road up to the rice fields where we do most of our farmin'. You saw the shops on AR way here. Far as payment goes, you." The young man who entered trailed off when he saw the people in front of him, saying, "Doors open, so he should be in here." His dark hair hung down close to his eyes in a scruffy fashion. With a slender build and tanned skin from working long hours in the agricultural fields, he appeared to be in his early 20s. He had dark chocolate brown eyes. He wore wooden shoes and a dark green cloak. A small tanto with a tattered scabbard stood by his side. Hey, Hiro. I was just looking for you." Hiroshi said to the boy, "Kenji, what are you doing here? I thought I gave you the week off." Kenji gazed at the floor and stroked the back of his neck. Hiro narrowed his eyes at the young man and said, "I was just, escorting the shinobi you hired to your office." "That'd be a mighty hard thing for ya to do, seeing as they're already here." "About that," Kenji said, moving aside the door to let the 5 individuals behind him to enter. The first was a middle-aged man dressed in a gray tunic and a black jumpsuit. The bottom of his garment was secured in place by a purple belt of twisted rope. His brown hair, which reached the base of his neck, was slicked back. His hands and eyes were his most peculiar features. His hands gleamed and were a metallic gray tone. The colors extended at least to his wrist, but his jumpsuit concealed how high it went. He had no distinguishing traits and his eyes were white. The man's lips were pressed into a tight line, and he wore a look of impassivity. A woman wearing a similar outfit to the first male was the second individual. Her black hair was twisted back into short pigtails that protruded into the air, and her eyes were light blue with a wicked glitter in them. She had a ruthless grin on her ivory face, which was enhanced by her black lipstick and eyeshadow, and the traditional kunai pouch was fastened securely to her left leg. A younger girl in her mid-teens was behind those two. She wore black and gray camouflage pants and a tan combat vest over her torso. She had long black hair that hung down to the small of her back, held together at the end by a big purple ribbon. Although it was on her right side, she too wore a kunai bag. She had a casual scarf over her neck that matched the pattern of her leggings. A young male roughly the same age as the previous girl entered next. His dark hair was spiky and pointed off his left side. He had black eyes with small irises and pupils. He was wearing a loose-fitting, beige t-shirt with 3 printing of the death symbol along the front and 2 black lines across the shoulders. Metal face guards ran down the sides of his face, which were worn. He wore a snake camouflage scarf over his neck, just like the female in front of him. The last one came in slowly, his bow-legged position making little difference to his deliberate steps. He appeared considerably smaller than he actually was because of his slumped back. His head and much of his face were bandaged. Only his left eye was exposed. He was dressed in a big gray poncho with long sleeves that reached his hands. He, too, wore a scarf with a snake design around his neck. From the back of his scarf, a straw raincoat extended to his knees. The 5 ninja went in and took their places in the room. The younger 3 shinobi stood behind the 2 senior ones who stood in front. The metal forehead guard that each of the 5 wore on their brows, with a single 8th node gracing the middle, was the one item they had in common. Hiroshi questioned, "Katona, what are you doing here?" His wide eyes and tone betrayed his utter astonishment at their arrival. "Nice to see you too, geezer," replied the newcomer's older woman. She gave Team 8 a brief glare. Athena looked at her blankly and said, "And I could be asking the same thing about those 4 Konoha shinobi. We were hired by Prefect Sato to help police Ibaraki." Katona struck a sarcastic, contemplative expression, tapping her index finger against her cheek. Before she could finish, Hiro said, That's funny because we were hired to the same thing, just like we have been for the past 2 years." Katona only glanced at Kenji, who was starting to shuffle uneasily. "I already told you last time y'all were here that I was ending my contract with Otogakure. Konoha offered us a lower rate, and we need to save all the money we can what with the price of crops dropping so low these days. Just who in the Sam hell hired you back on?" Katona said. Hiroshi leapt from his chair, snatched up his walking stick, and struck Kenji on the side of the head with it with a swiftness that scarcely seemed appropriate for a man his age. Hiro struck him again, saying, "Ah, you old coot, what the foo, ow." The young guy rubbed his reddening skin and stared at the older one, saying, "That second one was fair not watchin' language. The first one was fair goin' behind my back and hearin' a squad of shinobi with village money. Why in the name of Kami would ya do something so stupid?" "Because of them," he yelled, accusing Athena with a finger. "Katona and her squad were doing just fine, but no, you had to go and hire some foreigners who know nothing about us, just to save a few bucks." Hiroshi jumped with rage. "You brat. Don't you get what you've done? If this ain't handled right, this could turn into a war with Ibaraki in the middle. This wouldn't have had to happen at all if you had just stuck with Otogakure. Besides, I wouldn't have had to go behind your back if you actually gave me some power around here instead of having to sit back and watch you do all the work every day," the child said. "You know full well why I don't, Kenji." His reaction only resulted in him receiving another slap from Hiro's stick. "Why, because of that thing with Emiko." Kenji started to say something, but Hiro brandished his stick, making the younger man quickly run for the door and out of the building. "No, that's not why, but you'd be smart to remember that tryin' to fool around with her boss's granddaughter ain't a very good idea. Now get out of my sight before I give yous another lump." Hiroshi sighed in frustration and sagged back into his chair. Katona laughed merrily and said, "Nice to see Kenji hasn't changed much in the month we've been gone." The old man gave a headshake. He looked at Athena and dropped his head, saying, "That boy is going to be the end of me, I swear. He's got a silver tongue in a pig's head, and nothing good's ever come of it. Please forgive my apprentice's actions. He means well, but sometimes he ain't got a lick of sense. It was nice seeing you again, Katona, but as you can see we already have things covered. Don't worry, y'all can keep the money Kenji paid Tom make up fair the trouble he caused." The female shinobi nodded her head. "Sorry, Hiroshi, but the contract Kenji signed says that any attempt by Ibaraki to end the assignment early will mean you have to pay the Sound 6 times what he already did to hire us. It was the only way our leaders would agree to job here after you cut the last one short. Hiro murmured a series of curse words. The Sound Junin nodded when he said, all right, I get it. Still only here fair the standard 1-month trial period though, right? Well, at least the boy didn't screw with that part of it. Fine then, y'all can stay here and help the Konoha shinobi get familiar with the village. We'll sort the rest of this out at the end of the month. The elderly gentleman cracked his back before getting up. At that point, Hiroshi picked up his stick and bag and walked out of the room. It might as well show you Konoha shinobi where you'll be staying. Katona, you and your squad, and your friend there can come with if you want. After a slightly tense exchange between the two shinobi groups, they trailed behind the elderly guy. Under a bright, high, noon sun, the young girl ran as fast as she could. The constant beating of feet against the cracked soil in her ears blended with the quick pace of blood rushing through her veins. Her tongue begged for a drop of water, but her mouth was sandy and dry. The girl's body was fighting to keep her cool, and she was drenched in sweat. More than ever, the girl's lungs struggled to feed her screaming muscles. She carried herself farther up the DITR path, her hurting arms and legs pumping monotonously back and forth. Her painful soles were starting to blister, yet she was unable to stop. She would be abandoned if she stopped, and the girl's dignity would not allow that to happen. Ino caught a glimpse of her comrades straining to keep going out of the corner of her eye. Shikamaru's sweat had turned his gray shirt nearly black, and for once, the weary expression on his face wasn't just a sign of lethargy. Choji had long since given up his bandana and scarf. In an attempt to keep up, the poor lad had been forced to hastily fit the two objects into his backpack. Since the genin had been forced to eat only extremely low rations for the previous 3 days, Ino was certain that the Akamichi was suffering the most out of the three. Healthy eating had never been a reputation of the big boy's kin. Naturally, that did not imply that any of them were in a bad mood. Though Ino knew Shikamaru had merely made the bare minimum of effort to evade his mother's nagging, all three had performed at least passably well in the academy's physical training component. No, the Yamanaka heiress was aware that the one man they were pursuing was the cause of their present misery. Not that it mattered, but the blonde gave her sensei the most intense scowl she could manage under the circumstances. If he saw it, it would mean that he had paused and waited long enough for them to close the gap. The three of them could hardly keep him in sight as it was. For them, this was meant to be a rite of passage, but for 3 days in a row, it had been nothing but constant suffering. As soon as there was enough light to see 10 feet ahead of them, the three genin began sprinting, and they continued until the sun had completely set. Kratos. Sensei would stop when one of them fainted, giving the three a moment's rest until the child was well enough to resume. They continued for 6 whole days till, in the afternoon of the 6th, a sizable metropolis finally appeared. In stark contrast to the surrounding woodland, the enormous urban center grew out of the environment, but Team 10 did not make it to the outskirts until nearly nightfall. Outside a modest inn, the genin discovered their teacher. When his students arrived, Kratos stated, "Room 203. He then threw a little key at Ino and vanished into the establishment. When she eventually succeeded, the girl struggled a little, trying to capture the small thing in the dark, fuming at the empty void where her sensei had been. Shikamaru frowned at her antics and said, "Come on, Ino. Let's just go inside." HMPH. The Yamanaka sighed and went inside with her childhood pals, bumping into a man who had been walking by the door. The man staggered backwards a little, but he was spared from falling because of the heavy bundle of sheets in his arms. With some emphasis, the man jostled the covers and added, "Oops, sorry about that. It's kind of hard for me to see where I'm going at the moment." He was a young man in his mid-20s, with jet black hair that was medium in length and a height of just under 6 feet. He wore thin, framed glasses that obscured his black eyes. Over his brown tunic, a white apron was hanging down the front. To get a better look at the three, the man looked as far around the bundle as he could. "Ah, you must be the young master's master Kratos mentioned earlier. Follow me, and I'll show you to your room." Now that he had nothing else to do, the genin lined up behind the man and followed him up the stairs that led to the main entrance's left. After a quick stroll down a corridor and 2 stories, they had reached their destination. As he struggled in vain to unlock the door, the man remarked sweetly, "Here we are, room 203. These are actually the bedsheets for this room, so if you would wait out here for a little bit, I'll have it ready in no time." When Choji talked, the genin stepped clumsily to the side, observing his futile attempts. Do you need some help?" Shikamaru began to exhale with relief, but he stopped when Ino pressed her elbow into his side. "Oh no, 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 don't worry about it, young masters. You came here to rest, not work." Stepping forward, the Yamanaka let the struggling man in the door. His cheeks flushing, he responded, "Thank you." There were 4 distinct beds evenly distributed across the charming decor of the room. There was a medium-sized dresser with a mirror on top between each bed. There was a tiny bathroom to the left of the door. 2 windows looked out onto the inn's front. The 4 of them started working once the man placed his bundle of sheets on the closest cot. Ino, who dislikes extended silences, chose to strike up a conversation as they went. She tucked herself into a corner and said, "So, you work here?" A little uncomfortably, the man said, "Actually, I'm the owner of this inn. Uliriamu Shie, at your service." As Shikamaru collapsed on the bed Choji and he had completed building, he asked their host, "Wait, if you own this place, then why are you doing something as troublesome as this yourself?" "There's no one else to do it. This place does not get very many tenants at one time, so I haven't bothered to hire anyone else. I'm usually able to handle workload all on my own," explained Uliriamu. Choji asked, "Don't you have any family nearby?" "No, my wife and I moved here from the northern side of the Land of Fire 7 years ago. It was our dream to start an inn, nothing too fancy, simply a nice place where people could rest without having to deal with the bustle of the city." With a sorrowful look, the innkeeper asked, "So then, doesn't your wife help?" The room's atmosphere immediately soured when someone said, "She died almost a year ago." Ino said softly, "I'm sorry." Uliriamu made a hand gesture. After that, there was no more talk, and the 4 silently completed their chore. "It's fine. I had my time to grieve, and now I've moved on like I know she would have wanted." Uli clapped his hands together when it was finished. The mention of food caused each genin to suddenly recall the condition of their bodies. "Well, thank you for your help, you 3. Dinner has already been served for tonight, but I would more than happy to bring you up any leftovers. If not, breakfast is from 7 to 8 tomorrow morning." At that moment, the siren call of sleep overrode the allure of a home. Cooked lunch. Shikamaru set the example for Ino and Choji, and the 3 of them groaned with exhaustion before falling asleep. Ino ate as much as she could at the inn's dining room the following morning, groggily. Due to the inn's small size, the first floor only contained a few rooms on either side, with a variety of tables and chairs arranged in the center. A kitchen was created by dividing off a chunk of the back right corner. There was a big brick and mortar oven with a pleasant fire burning within. As Ino ate, Choji sat next to her, far ahead of the small child. Naturally, Shikamaru was still sleeping upstairs. The platinum blonde was reminded by a voice in the back of her mind that she should be following a diet, but she commanded the voice to stop talking since she was hungry. Her body's lengthy recuperation process had begun with last night's sleep, but the Yamanaka had serious doubts that Kratos Sensei would be kind enough to grant them a reprieve today. So she needed to be sure she would have the stamina to endure whatever new hell he had them in. When the gray-skinned man came in the back door, her fears were confirmed. Kratos strode past the 2 and out the front door, saying, "Pack your bags. We're leaving in 30 minutes. With a furrowed brow, Ino hurriedly cleared her plate. Shikamaru was forcefully woken in their chamber by a dark crimson apple slapping him across the face. When the boy muttered something, Ino responded by throwing another one. He should be happy she brought him anything, you lazy jerk. She could have just left him go hungry because she valued a few more minutes of sleep over sating his hunger, but she was a good teammate. After a few minutes, the group departed again for the city. As the hours went by, the shinobi's surroundings started to shift. The dense forest gave way to modest houses and settlements. Larger companies and apartment buildings eventually took their place, and eventually the 4 found themselves in the center of the city. To avoid losing their sensei in the well-organized mayhem of the sidewalks and streets, Ino, Shikamaru, and Choji made sure to follow closely behind him. There was a flurry of activity all around them. People went from one place to another in the same dance they did every day, moving around like ants in an anthill. As the group proceeded toward the less than attractive part of the city, the people soon started to thin out. Kratos Sensei finally stopped in front of a tiny, dilapidated pub. Because of all the dirt and grime that had accumulated over the years, the few windows that were there were all but opaque. Above the door was a faded, ancient sign with few recognizable letters. The Junin instructor glanced at his pupils behind him. Ino refrained from rolling her eyes at how melodramatic he sounded as he growled, "Stay close, and do not talk with anyone." The pub's interior was nearly exactly what Ino had imagined. Loud discussions, dim lighting, a musty stench, and customers who are as likely to share a drink as to stab you in the back. At the intimidating sight of the Greek with the tattoos, the customers quickly returned to their work after looking up from what they were doing to assess the newcomers. Ignoring the looks, Kratos Sensei strode straight up to the bartender, who was idly cleaning a glass. For a few while, the two guys observed one another without exchanging words. The tavern worker had a barrel chest, muscular shoulders, and a heavy build. He had a thick brown beard that covered the lower part of a scar that ran diagonally across his face. His powerful body was barely concealed by his short, sleeved plaid shirt. Giuseppe Barelki. With a strong accent, the man said, "Who wants to know?" Reaching into his pouch, Kratos took out a sealed scroll. The bartender unfurled the paper and snapped the glue as he handed it out. The bartender rolled the scroll back up and placed it in his own pocket after taking a quick look. Then he grabbed a little quantity of money from below the counter and threw them to Kratos. The Junin bowed and turned to return the way he had come, followed closely by Ino, Shikamaru, and Shoji, who were all in confusion. Ino's curiosity had run out of control outside. What was that all about? The Yamanaka froze in place when she heard the words, "That was our mission. We will return to Konoha tomorrow." "You're kidding us, right? That was our entire mission?" Kratos said plainly, "Yes." In total shock, Ino muttered. The platinum blonde was forced to accompany her sensei as he started the journey back to the inn. As her mind attempted to process what she had learnt, her body operated automatically. The entire drive back was devoid of any conversation. The four returned to their makeshift quarters just in time for dinner. Like a ghost, Ino floated through the front door, her teammates following closely behind. Neither Shikamaru nor Choji could recall ever seeing her this silent in the 12 years they had known her, and it deeply unsettled them. When they arrived at their room, the gang withdrew inside. Ino collapsed back onto her bed without a word. Slowly, she reached for a pillow nearby, pulled it over her face, and screamed in rage. Shikamaru's hand was unable to resist palming his face as Choji pulled back in astonishment. Ino drained every breath of air from her lungs, then settled for beating the edge of her pillow with hate-filled fists. An anxious Choji asked his female acquaintance, "Are you okay, Ino?" Tearing the cushion away from her face, Ino sat up straight. She yelled, "No, I'm not okay. Our sadist of a sensei just dragged us across the entire land of fire, almost killing us from exhaustion, all so that one stupid scroll could be delivered to some random person in a bar." As Shikamaru said, "Troublesome." The Nara genuinely felt a shudder go down his spine from the intensity of Ino's withering glare as she fixed it on him. "Don't start with me, Shikamaru Nara." Choji made a feeble defense, saying, "I'm sure he had a reason for it." Ino gave an eye roll. The Yamanaka threw a scowl on her face and pushed up her chest, saying, "Oh, I know exactly why he did it." She remarked in a low, derisive voice, "I don't want to teach weaklings, so prove to me you are worthy by running non-stop for 6 days while I starve you." Hesitantly, Choji nodded his head. That did sound like something their new teacher would do, based on what little they had been able to find out about him. At that moment, a loud knock stopped the ranting. A little opening in the door allowed Uliriamu's head to protrude. "Is everything all right in here? I could hear someone yelling from downstairs," Shikamaru said. Ino snorted at his evasive reply, "Don't worry about it. We're just a little frustrated with our sensei at the moment." "Okay. Well, I just finished making dinner, so you can eat when you're hungry." The Nara stated dryly, "I think we'll wait until after our sensei's left." The boy shrugged his shoulders and said, "Oh, if that's the case, how about I sneak some up and let you 3 eat in here?" Shikamaru wiped his brow as Uli shut the door behind him, Sure, this is all such a drag. As he prepared dinner for the kids below, Uliriamu hummed softly to himself behind the kitchen counter. The innkeeper nearly jumped out of his skin when he turned to go back up the steps after placing 3 plates on a tray since Kratos was now standing on the opposite side. Hello, Master Kratos. I was just, bringing your students there. He continued to speak. With a slight cough, the shorter man continued. Kratos merely gave him a chilly look and said, "Yours is over there when you want it." Uliriamu recognized the hidden message as the ghost of Sparta narrowed his brows and said, "Are you sure that's all you want? I could whip up something better if..." In order to avoid spilling the contents of his platter, he hurried up the stairs and around the counter. Kratos continued to stare at the young man until he was no longer there. The former god of war then sat at one of the tables and silently gobbled up his bread, salted pork, and a couple slices of cheese. In a matter of seconds, he drained the leather canteen by washing it down with a flask of wine. But as soon as he did, Kratos realized something was off. Due to his status as a demigod, he was typically not affected by outside substances like alcohol, if at all. On this occasion, however, he could already feel his vision beginning to swim. He could feel his head whirling more and more. The Spartan tried to balance himself by holding onto the counter. He struggled valiantly to keep the blackness from creeping into the corners of his eyes, but to no avail. Kratos plummeted again, collapsing into a sea of red torment. R.A. Backwoods innkeeper, he sure does have some good stuff. The red water released Kratos as he regained consciousness. Damn right, he does. I almost feel sorry for the poor bastards. They had to haul those kids all the way back to the base while we get to stay behind and get sloshed. He heard the sound of 2 distinct voices. You know, I don't think the boss'll mind too much if we took a bit of a vacation after we dropped this fucker off at the bounty office. His vision slowly returned to normal. You talkin' 'bout that whorehouse near the pier? He asked. On the other side of the room, 2 men stood with their backs to him. They passed a big bottle back and forth between them. He was lying in a room's corner, his ankles and wrists chained together, saying, "Course I am." He could hear the blades of Athena wailing for food, still resting on his back. "Okay, I'm in." The 2 were drawn to a succession of loud snaps. The sake bottle they were sipping from shattered over his head, and the person on the right was flung out the second-story window before he had ever twitched. With a curse, the second man quickly pulled a knife from his belt. Grabbing that arm by the wrist, Kratos delivered a violent blow to the upper part of it, shattering the man's humerus into tiny fragments. Then he wrenched the lifeless limb upwards, pressing the razor-sharp edge against the jugular of his erstwhile captor. Just before Kratos pulled his arm across, the man's pupils widened, and he cut his own throat. The man shook his head, trying to get his thoughts straight, and Kratos let him fall to the ground. He saw that the room's arrangement was identical to that of the inn where his team had been staying. His mind finally registered what the guys had been discussing before they died, and this knowledge brought all other thoughts to a grinding halt. The ghost of Sparta rushed toward his student's room as it exploded into the motel corridor. He was furious when he discovered it, and his hands balled into fists. The door to room 203 was ajar. There was no trace of the 3 kids, and the interior was immaculate. They appeared to have never been there in the first place. Kratos forced himself to concentrate, turned his head, and went downstairs. At first, the descent was a little wobbly because the effects of the medicine he had taken were still present in his body. Luckily for him, it was short-lived as the last of the blasted poison was filtered out of his body. The inn's ground level was a complete wreck. Chairs and tables were overturned. Broken glass and empty flagons littered the floor, and food and trash were everywhere. Someone had been attempting to clean things up, as seen by the 2 garbage bags and the broom, but no one was visible. Kratos' attention was immediately drawn to a faint shuffle coming from the kitchen corner. It turns out that the room was not as empty as it appeared. He wasted no time in sweeping away any furniture that stood in his way as he marched directly to the spot where this whole situation had begun. The Spartan's huge fists caught the protruding lip as he arrived at the counter. His contracting muscles caused the old wood to crack and moan until it eventually gave way, causing the once great god to tear the entire divider from the ground. The slab of lumber slamming down in front of Uliriamu's face prevented him from scurrying away on his hands and knees. Kratos lifted the innkeeper off the ground by grabbing him by the nape of his neck. He screamed, "Where are they?" Despite the agonizing hold of the demigod, Uli was able to choke out, "I don't know." The younger man's skull was bashed against the stone oven by Kratos, who growled. He drew the sniveling owner so close that they were only a few inches apart. The tortured guy threatened, "Do not test my patience, worm." Uliriamu stumbled, A small island of the coast of the land of rivers. The innkeeper's voice raised in desperation as he said, Please, you have to understand. I had to do it. There was no other choice. They would have killed if I had refused. Please have mercy." As the ghost of Sparta crushed his teeth in rage, the dining hall went silent. At last, Kratos let Uliriamu fall to the ground, freeing him from his hold. He spat bitterly, "The strong have no need for mercy." Uli collapsed to his knees, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Thank you. Yes, I understand. I promise I'll get stronger. Oh gods, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank y. Grck. Uliriamu's expression of thanks suddenly died in his throat. His mouth dropped open as he gazed down as the blade of Athena pierced his chest, his eyes wide with dread. Spittle and blood poured freely from the corners of his mouth as he coughed uncontrollably. Kratos violently twisted his blade and yanked it away from the mutilated stomach. "The weak do not deserve it." As he departed the inn, the ghost of Sparta never turned around and left the dead body lying there. Kratos turned west and started to run, looking up at the lowering sun. As he plodded over the clay road, Naruto groaned, "Are we there yet?" A chorus of voices responded, "No, are we there yet? No, are we there yet? No, are we there yet? No, are we?" Smack. OWW. Thank you, Sakura. You're welcome, Kakashi. Sensei. Naruto held his injured skull as the party moved ahead. After 5 days of travel, the boredom of the journey was beginning to wear them down. In order to keep up with their client's slow moving carriage, the shinobi had to move far more slowly than usual. The carriage itself was a quite tasteful design. It could accommodate up to 4 passengers in the cab and 2 more in the driver's seat. Even though the road was bumpy, the passengers were able to travel with considerable ease thanks to the large, elaborate wheels. A pair of robust oxen stood in front, dragging the exquisitely adorned carriage as it traveled. Overall, it was a car built much more for luxury than speed. Greetings from inside the vehicle, Akihiro replied, "Do not worry, Naruto. It should not be long now." Naruto sighed and swung his sword slowly, saying, "I know. I'm just ready for some action already." The boy's antics made the middle-aged merchant giggle. Holding his large belly, he roared, "So much like your father. The first to a fight and the last one leave, Naruto paused his task and turned to face the man. "You know my dad? Of course. I've had the pleasure of hiring both your father and your mother on multiple occasions." He continued to laugh. "I actually tried to request either of them first for this mission, but apparently, they were reluctant to do so, having just acquired new genin teams of their own. I guess I'll have to make do with their son, the last of the Uchiha, and the great copy ninja himself." Akihiro continued to giggle. Naruto could only raise an eyebrow at the customer of his team. He had a feeling it was just one of the reasons his parents had rejected the position. Sasuke had given the two a quick scowl from the opposite side of the carriage, so it appeared that he was not the only one who thought that. Oddly enough, though, it didn't appear to be exclusively about Mr. Fukui. A tear was wiped from the balding man's eye. "In any case, it matters little. You 4 will not have to lift single finger if there is any luck to be had." "What do you mean? I thought we were supposed to help protect your property from bandits." The blonde scratched his head, perplexed. "I mean what I said. My own men will hopefully be able to put a stop to the attacks once and for all before another one is launched." Akihiro's expression darkened as he asked, "But why not just hire some shinobi to do all of that for you?" He pointed to the front of the carriage and asked, "Naruto, do you see those men?" 5 soldiers were on foot there, spread out in a semicircle in front of the wagon. They all carried a long spear that was held against their right shoulder and were dressed simply. Before Team 7 had even left the town, they had been traveling with the group. Naruto had been curious about their identities, but he had never bothered to inquire because he didn't think it was that essential. "Every one of them is a member of my personal guard. It is their duty to protect myself, my family, and my estate with their lives. As such, the fact that this recent batch of rapscallions has managed to prove so troublesome is a blow to their entire company's honor. Hiring a team of ninja to do it for them would only prove to pour salt on that open wound. It would send a message that I am no longer confident in their abilities and find them incapable of doing the job I hired them for. In addition, it would say to those who live in the area around me that my forces are weak and that my lands may be ripe for the taking. Mr. Fukui shook his head, asking, "Doesn't hiring us do all of that anyway?" "Not quite. Because it will take a large portion of their numbers to put these brigands down for good. The defenses at my home will be stretched thin. Hiring your team says that I recognize my men are only human and would never ask them to do the impossible. They may not like shinobi taking care of their problems for them, but they do not mind having them around to watch their backs." As he listened to Akihiro, Naruto scowled and clasped his hands behind his neck. Although much of what he had said made sense, he was left with a foul taste in his mouth by all of the hidden messages and double meanings. It was just the nature of his character. He didn't like to mince words and spoke his mind without much consideration for other people's opinions. The Uzumaki didn't have much more time to consider the subject since the group was finally able to see the Fukui mansion and the brutal battle that was breaking out in front of its front gate as they ascended a short hill. In a low voice, Akihiro said, "Oh dear." Everyone's attention was abruptly drawn to the sound of a book cracking shut. After putting his copy of Icha Icha back in his backpack, Kakashi remarked, "Well, it looks like it's time for us to get to work." The merchant's guard, consisting of 5 members, had already positioned themselves defensively around the vehicle. The guardsman's leader saluted Kakashi sharply and said, "Sasuke, Sakura, stay with Mr. Fukui and find a way to get him into the manor safely. I'm sure there is a side entrance meant for just this sort of event, correct?" "Yes, sir. They will be safe with us." With a menacing grin, Naruto started to flex up his limbs and said, "Naruto, you're with me. We'll see if we can't give those other guards a bit of a helping hand." A sergeant shouted to his soldiers as they engaged the approaching band of outlaws. "Head on, stand your ground, men. Don't let a single one of these bastards through." The advantage they currently held, being able to use their spears to ward off the invaders while facing the stone wall enclosing their master's property, would not last indefinitely. They had to get reinforcements quickly or they would be too tired to defend. The ground started to tremble, and a huge wall of dirt appeared, creating a barrier between the two forces. Earth style. Earth wall jutsu. Any robber who had the misfortune of standing on top of that region was flung into the air. As they plummeted back down to earth, their fellows halted their activities and stared. They were so focused on the sky that they failed to notice the orange-clad boy who appeared at the right flank. With his Xiphos ready, Naruto charged at the first person he saw. With a sudden lunge, he drove the sword deep into the man's back. He fell to the ground, lifeless, as the cold steel went right through his racing heart. The blonde genin staggered back a little as he withdrew his sword from the body. He had never taken a life before, until that moment. His mind struggled to process what had happened, and his body froze. When the brigands in the area eventually saw him and tried to attack, Naruto was fortunate that his training activated automatically. He kicked the offender hard in the shin after easily blocking the initial blow. Naruto moved closer and slashed the man diagonally across the chest after he yelled in agony. As his sword sank deeply into flesh and moved fluidly over the man's rib cage, he could feel every bump. Naruto sidestepped a rusty blade that was aimed at his spiky, haired head. When he stood up again, he observed another bandit attempting to use an overhead swing of his mace to smash him into the ground. When Naruto swiftly stabbed him several times in the intestines, he paid a heavy price for leaving his stomach utterly exposed. He ripped his blade loose and whirled to find another foe. Naruto used all of his strength to swing his blade low because a poor soul was standing too near to the child. As Naruto successfully cut all the way through the man's knee, severing the limb neatly, the man let out a cry of pain. A Xiphos to the trachea quickly put a stop to his cries. A terrified cry went up, "Retreat!" and the bandits immediately started to disperse into the nearby forest. In the chaotic stampede that ensued, Naruto nearly lost his footing. He shouted at their shriveling backs, "Cowards! Get back here and fight!" as they fled as quickly as they could. His brain suddenly registered all that had transpired over the last few minutes just as he was about to give chase. Dropping to his knees, Naruto's body shivered violently. He had spent a significant amount of his time at the academy helping to prepare his class for this very moment, since he knew that as a ninja, he would ultimately have to kill someone. Naruto attempted, in his mind, to dehumanize the victims of his murders in accordance with his training, but it was ineffective. He had never been informed it would be so simple. The simplicity of the actual act was not explained by any of the teachers. He only had to swing his sword once to take another person's life. Naruto felt a reassuring hand rest on his shoulder. He started to speak, but any word died in his throat as he gazed up into his sensei's observant eyes. Idly, the blonde saw his sensei's garments covered in other people's blood. How long they stayed there was unknown to him. Kakashi silently assisted him in standing again and led him past the metal gates to the spacious house inside. In one of the tiny rooms Mr. Fukui had set up for his team while they were there, Naruto sat peacefully on a bed. His arms were curled securely around his legs, drawing them close to his chest. Sakura and Sasuke were close by, and they both had the same shocked expression in their eyes. It seems that during the major onslaught, there had been a small contingent of bandits waiting for anyone attempting to enter through the back entrance. The guards that accompanied them failed to arrive. With a shudder, Naruto attempted to curl into a tighter ball. He was unable to think of anything but the lifeless, icy gaze of the men he had slain. They would never again smolder with rage or light up with ecstasy. Tears of sorrow would never wet them again. It had taken him less than 3 minutes to make them empty, and they would stay empty for the remainder of the time, without any feeling. He desired his parents. He wanted to feel his mother's warm, reassuring embrace as she softly reassured him that everything would be fine. When he stood by his father's side, he wanted to feel the unflinching strength that filled his body. As usual, he urged them to improve the situation. Kakashi Sensei, leaning against the wall beside the door, broke the hush that had been engulfing the little bedroom by saying, "Okay, I need you three to listen up." Before moving on, the copy ninja checked to make sure each of his students was paying attention. "I know what you're going through. I would like to tell you that it gets easier over time, but I'd be lying. You are shinobi of the village hidden in the leaves. Killing is a part of what we do. This time you were lucky. The men you killed were thieves and murderers that the world is better off without, but that won't always be the case. Mothers, sons, sisters, friends, it does not matter. There will come a time when you will be forced to kill them. It's not right or fair, but that is the kind of world we live in. You must be prepared to live with that fact for the rest of your life." Sakura's voice was barely above a whisper as she shakily questioned, "How do we do that?" Naruto looked at his teammate, who was female. She had her head lowered, observing the neatly folded hands resting in her lap. Her eyes were filling with fluid. It was difficult for Naruto to tell, but Sasuke seemed to be performing the best of the three. His stern face prevented any indication of his true emotions from escaping the inner workings of his mind. Kakashi closed the one eye that was visible and let out a slow breath through his nostrils. "I can't tell you because I don't know. The answer is different for every person. Some spend their entire lives never discovering it. However, I can give one piece of advice. Focus on what you are feeling right now. Killing may be a duty all shinobi must be prepared to carry out, but that is all it should ever be. The fact that you three feel this way proves that you are still human, and that's okay. The death of another person should never make you feel good. The moment it does, you will be no better than the men you killed today." The Hitaki got up and opened the bedroom entrance. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, our mission will begin in full. Mr. Hitaki." A low tenor voice spoke to Kakashi from a short distance down the corridor as he silently shut the door behind him. As he turned, he noticed a man wearing samurai armor coming toward him. The robes underneath were jet black, the straps light brown, and the scaled plates themselves a dark, forest green. Curiously, the larger sword was on his right side, while a wakizashi and katana were fastened firmly to his waist. His hair was a slightly deeper hue of his armor, tied back into a short ponytail that just touched the base of his neck. He could see them scrutinizing him in turn, and his eyes were a vivid turquoise. He walked with a sense of authority as he marched up to the Konoha shinobi, without wasting a single step. The fact that he bowed low and introduced himself was all the more unexpected because of this. "Good evening. I am Momosuke Oshiro, captain of Master Akahiro's guard. I am about to go and make my report to him about today's attack." I believe there are a few things you will be interested in. Kakashi gave a nod. He stepped aside to let Momosuke pass and replied, "Lead the way." The two set off through the manor, the Junin falling in behind him. They soon arrived at an opulent door close to the front door. After 3 stinging knocks, the captain waited. "Come in," was the tired response. Mr. Fukui stood inside, his forehead against the cool glass of a wide window. The space itself was a private study, with books and scrolls crammed along the wall. The Hitaki saw that a large number of them were different business records that had gathered over time. Momosuke walked confidently ahead and stopped before the only furnishings in the room, a plush chair and an ornate desk covered in paper. Kakashi, on the other hand, chose to remain in one of the less visible areas. Akihiro gave a small shake of his head and said, "Captain Momosuke Oshiro, here to make my report." Instead of answering, Oshiro chose to just stay attentive. "Mamo, how many times do I have to tell you not to be so formal?" The trader let out a sigh. "Proceed." "We have recovered all of the bodies left from the battle. Preliminary reports put the number of casualties at 18 of our own men and 63 for the attackers. This, of course, does not include any that may have died afterwards from the wounds they sustained. There was no major structural damage to the walls or gates." Momosuke disregarded the dismissal and said, "Good. Give the men my gratitude and inform them that the funeral service will be held 3 days from now." His brows narrowed and his voice became solemn. "There is more, my master. A few of the bandits were still alive when we collected them. One of them was Guro Kobayashi." The name made Akihiro's face go white. He staggered over to his chair and sank into it. His fists grabbed his hair as his body sagged forward, supported by his elbows. Oshiro nodded and asked, "Are you sure?" He hesitated for a time before saying, "We were able to convince him to give us every bit of information he had before he passed away from a deep laceration across his chest an hour ago. Tenzen is supplying these bandits with both weapons and manpower. His stalkers are the ones who organized and command them." After paying close attention to the conversation, Kakashi made the decision to participate himself. "Sorry to interrupt, but I seem to be at a disadvantage. Who are Guro and Tenzen?" Momosuke replied, "Tenzen Daikoku, politician and former aide of the water daimyo. When he retired, the daimyo gave to him a vast amount of land as a gift for his years of faithful service. Since then, he has used his accumulated wealth and influence to garner a massive criminal empire and amass even more of this peninsula under his control. Now he's using that power to fund a pseudo-war in an attempt to take your land by force, most likely because Mr. Fukui refused an offer to sell it." Kakashi completed the task for him. The skipper gave a nod. "The stalkers are the top men of his organization. Not much is known about them other than they keep mostly to themselves. They carry out Daikoku's will behind the scenes, rarely ever getting involved personally." "So, who is Guro?" "He was member of Tenzen's syndicate in the area, important enough to know a few facts but low enough to not be considered valuable. It was he who first brought us Daikoku's offer to purchase this land." As the guys lost themselves in their own thoughts, the room fell silent. Oshiro finally broke the silence after what seemed like seconds turned into minutes. "Mr. Hitaki, would you and your team," Kakashi said, stopping the man before he could say anything further. "I know what you're going to ask, but I'm afraid that's slightly above my team's pay grade at the moment. I could do it myself, but it would take time and preparation. Plus, that would leave no one to look after my students in the meantime. Your best bet would be to hire another team from Konoha specifically tailored for such a mission." Mr. Fukui was awakened from his reverie by the last 3 words. "That is not an option. My master's funds are already stretched thin. He cannot afford to pay the price your village would require for infiltration and assassination." As the two warriors carried on their debate, his gaze shifted wildly between them. Mr. Fukui eventually stumbled out, getting up from his chair. "Now see here. What's all this talk about infiltration and," he said, pausing briefly to make sure he swallowed the lump in his throat. "Assassination. I suggest we all just settle down and take a deep breath. I'm sure that Mr. Hitaki and his team will be more than enough to handle this band of ruffians, and Daikoku will eventually give up." Oshiro began, "It will not be that easy." The merchant went on and on, growing more and more upset by the second. "Yes, it will. There's no need to be so rash. Just give it a little time." Momosuke yelled, "Akihiro!" and the man instantly fell silent. Whether you like it or not, we are at war. This problem will not simply go away, as you put it. Daikoku sent his best men to oversee this operation, which means he will not accept any failures. He will not stop until we are dead and he is in control of this land. This is not an opponent we can outlast. He has far more money and resources than we could ever compete with. Instead, our only hope is to cut off the head of this snake before it can strike a fatal blow. The stalkers must die. Oshiro made his way to the door. Mr. Fukui could only watch in shock as the captain of his guard vanished from view. If that is all, my master, I have a long-standing favor I must now go call upon. After carefully settling into his chair, he focused entirely on his task. This was seen by Kakashi as the conclusion of the meeting, and the man was left to finish the night oil as he assumed his place for the evening. On a tree branch with a view of the Fukui estate, two individuals stood by themselves. The moon and stars shone down on the ground, and the countryside was shrouded in a gentle midnight fog. They jumped silently over the stone barrier in front of them and out of the canopy. They landed close to an orchard's edge and sped quickly in the direction of the big manor in the distance. 3 kunai buried themselves in the path of the two as they had just left the ordered thicket. Naruto fixed his intense gaze on the two people he had stopped. Since his crew had arrived at Mr. Fukui's house, there had been 4 days of silence. He should have seen that this would not continue. The bigger of the two snarled at him, "Get out of the way, brat." The blonde grinned. "Not gonna happen." He drew his short sword in response. Before pushing them away, the genin's thoughts flashed with images of the men he had previously killed. He couldn't get sidetracked from his purpose. In addition, even though he was a little nervous about the massive sword fastened to the taller one's back, he could not help but feel excited at the thought of a good battle. A voice exclaimed, "Naruto!" Naruto caught a glimpse of Sakura sprinting toward him, followed by Sasuke and Kakashi. "Sensei!" As soon as the blonde and Pinkette saw the invaders, they parted ways. He was instructed to wait while she went and located the closest backup, who fortunately seemed to be nearby. When the 3 arrived at Kakashi, he gave the order, "Stand down, Naruto." The Uzumaki remained still. He asked, "Are you sure, Sensei?" His instructor assured him, "Don't worry, they're on our side." The 2 Narutos halted and let out a loud snort. "Hey, Sharingan Kakashi. To think that I would be called in to handle something one of Konoha's elite Junin was too weak stomach to do himself." Kakashi addressed the person who had spoken, saying, "You should feel proud. Even in the village hidden in the leaves, news of your failed coup attempt was heard about." Sakura glanced back and forth, perplexed. Nodding, he said, Sensei, do you know this guy? Zabuza Momochi, demon of the hidden mist."
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.